In the last dusklight hush before sundown, as cicadas buzzed low and heat shimmered off the crusted earth, Lyle Bronner watched the auction yard from the high corner of the fence, his calloused hands folded over the cedar rail like roots. Wind carried the mingled scent of sweat, sun-bleached timber, and horse dung, along with the occasional hopeful cry of an auctioneer fighting the slow death of his own reputation, a rancher without cattle. That was the phrase folks used behind his back, and not kindly. Not even a decade ago, the Bronner spread had stretched 1,200 acres and moved 2,000 head a year. Now there wasn't enough in his name to buy a fresh horseshoe, let alone a steer. But still he showed up every month, hat in hand, boots worn thin, pretending he had business among the men whose wealth had grown, while his crumbled like dry soil. They noticed him the way buzzards notice limping calves. And today, they'd smell the wound deeper than usual. His last horse, Buckskin, had gone lame, and even the barn roof had caved in after last week's storm. There was nothing left. Nothing but the fool's hope that something at this auction would give him a reason to come home without folding in on himself entirely. But it wasn't a heifer or a wagon team that stopped his breath when he saw her. She stood under the oak, wide-hipped and thick around the waist, her gingham dress clinging too close for modesty in the heat. She wore shame like a mantle and still held her head high. A woman in her 30s, maybe late, with eyes like rain-soaked earth and hands that looked like they'd fought off worse than hunger. A widow. That much was clear. No wedding ring, no escort, no laughter, just a sign pinned to her shoulder. Work marriage only, all rights reserved. Lyle had heard of it. Women too poor to keep their family farms. They offered themselves up for work contracts in exchange for lodging and food, sometimes a wage, sometimes just the promise they wouldn't starve. But this was something deeper. This wasn't a woman looking for charity. This was a woman offering the one thing she still controlled, herself. Name's Almina, the auctioneer barked, barely masking his disdain. 36. Big bones. Good for field labor or kitchen. No children, widowed last fall. Men chuckled. Someone muttered, "That one eats more than she earns." Another, "Might do better at the bakery than the barn." Lyle stepped forward before he thought too hard. $10 for the contract, he said. Loud enough. Firm. The laughter faded. The auctioneer blinked. 10? Lyle didn't blink. Didn't smile. Another man raised a hand. 12, just for the stew. Recipe. Lyle turned toward him, slow and steady. The man dropped his hand. The crowd fell silent. Lyle took off his hat, stepped through the dust, and looked Almina in the eye. "I got no cattle, not much land. No gold buried under the porch." She looked up. Meeting him, level. He continued, "But I'll feed you. I won't raise a hand to you, and you won't sleep cold. If you want out after a season, you go. That's the whole contract." She looked him over, saw the truth in his wrinkled shirt, the honesty in his weather-crack hands. Then she nodded. And the auctioneer said, "Sold." By sundown, she was riding beside him in his rusted cart, drawn by a borrowed mule. Her bag was small, her eyes quiet. The ranch came into view over the rise. More fence posts leaned and stood straight. The barn listed to one side, and the house bare bones, one porch rail missing, door hanging off one hinge. He saw her eyes take it all in. "Ain't much. It's more than I had this morning." They didn't speak the rest of the ride. When they got to the porch, he helped her down, tipping his hat in a way that felt like apology. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Clean the house before morning. You take the bed." She frowned. "It's your house. It's ours now. Or it will be." She stared at him for a long time, then nodded. And that night, as he laid on the barn floor, aching from the day and unsure what he'd just done, he heard something from the open window of the house, humming. Soft, steady, like a lullaby he hadn't known he'd forgotten. And For the first time in a long while, he slept without nightmares. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The first morning on Bronner land came wrapped in mist and silence, except for the mournful creak of the barn's broken hinge and the distant murmur of cattle from neighboring spreads. Lyle rose before the sun, his limbs aching from sleep on. Straw, the cold in his bones a reminder of every poor choice and bad season that brought him here. But when he stepped out into the open, the scent of firewood caught his nose. Then the subtle richness of bacon. And coffee. He froze. The porch door was swinging open, steam rolling from the kitchen window. Light flickered inside, and for the first time in over a year, it wasn't from a dying lantern he'd lit himself. Lyle approached the door slowly, his boots thudding across warped boards, heart knocking louder than any sound around him. Inside, Almina stood at the stove, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her thick braid pinned in a neat coil behind her head. The kitchen looked cleaner then. It had in months. Flour dusted the counter, a pan sizzled. "Morning," she said without turning. "You didn't have to. I did." He hesitated. "You got into town early?" She shook her head. "I made do, found cornmeal. Rendered lard from the old tin. Dried herbs, you had more than you thought. Just needed hands to remember it." He didn't reply, couldn't. "Sit, Lyle, there's more where that came from." He took the seat like a man sitting in a chapel for the first time, reverent and still. She brought him a plate, heavy with corn cakes, bacon, and a dollop of something tangy that tasted of apple. And vinegar. He ate like a man starved. She poured his coffee and leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Tell me where the tools are." He blinked. "You cooking, fixing, and hammering fences too. If I wait on you to fix it all, we'll both be under the dirt before next frost. I've built pens, stitched saddles, birthed calves, and done worse." She waited, unflinching. He rose, finished his coffee in one swig, and walked to the back door. "Follow me." They spent the morning clearing fallen beams from the barn. She moved slower than him, but steady, never complaining. When he offered to take her load, she just lifted her chin. "I'm fat, not fragile. Don't confuse the two." He didn't reply. But he smiled. By mid-afternoon, the sun blistered down, and sweat made salt maps of their clothes. She pulled water from the well without needing to ask. They sat under the one good shade tree left near the chicken coop, sharing silence that felt earned. "Why'd you do it?" she asked finally. "Buy the contract?" She nodded. He chewed the inside of his cheek. "You weren't begging." Everyone else looked like a sack of wet pity. When they stood up there, you looked like a damn challenge. Like you dared someone to say you weren't worth the breath it took to bid. She tilted her head, unreadable. "You spoke plain. Didn't dress it up. Didn't offer what you couldn't back. That matters, does it? It does to me." She turned back. "Toward the barn. Then let's fix that roof before supper." He watched her go. And felt the air shift, like something broken had begun to heal. By the third day, routine settled like old blankets. He rose early. She earlier. She cooked. He split wood. They met at the barn and worked the land until dusk, side by side, neither pressing for words that didn't need saying. But word traveled faster than a prairie wind. By the week's end, old Harlan Weaver came. Up the trail in his rickety buckboard, 2 crates of feed and a fat gossip tongue. "Heard tell you got yourself a wife out of the auction yard," he said, spitting brown juice into the dirt. "A partner," Lyle corrected, stepping off the porch. "Contracted." Harlan squinted. "She's a big one." Lyle's jaw tightened. "She works harder than most men. More honest, too." "Just saying. Folks are talking. Let 'em." Almina stepped onto the porch, arms folded, gaze sharp. "I make stew if you're staying, Mr. Weaver. If not, keep your gossip and go." The old man chuckled. Not unkindly. How maybe you two are what this county needs. Less talk, more work. He left the feed and tipped his hat. Lyle watched him go, then glanced at her. Thank you. She shrugged. Waste of a good stew, though. That night, they ate on the porch, watching the stars emerge in their slow, scattered rhythm. Ever been married? She asked, unprompted. He shook his head. Came close once. What happened? War. Her folks moved her north. She married a banker. You? Lost the land, then the pride. Took a while to lose the anger. She nodded like she understood. And you? He asked. Widow, Jacob Clark. Hard man, harder drinker. Died in a well. Drunk? No, fell. But he was probably drunk, so yes. They sat in silence. Ever think about starting again? She asked softly. He turned to her, studied her face. In the low lamplight. I think that's exactly what I'm doing. She smiled, small and tired. But real. And in that moment, the contract between them became something more. Something neither dared name. Not yet. But peace, like crops, is a fickle thing. And the next morning, it was threatened before breakfast. A man on horseback came up the trail, dust flying behind him. Dressed too neat. Hat too stiff. He dismounted without asking permission and stepped up to the porch with a ledger in hand. Mr. Bronner? Who's asking? Clayton Durst. I'm with the county collections office. Almina appeared behind Lyle, her apron still dusted with. Flour, you're a week early, Durst frowned. Excuse me? The county doesn't send out collectors until the 10th. Today's the 3rd, Durst stiffened. I was instructed to deliver notice in person. Tax lien. Lyle said nothing, taking the envelope. Durst hesitated. Ma'am, you wouldn't happen to be the recent purchase from the labor auction? Almina folded her arms. I'm the woman holding a hot skillet behind this door. You want to ask that again? Durst flushed. I'll expect payment by the 10th, Mr. Bronner, or the county will repossess the land. Good day. He left in a flurry of offended pride and hoofbeats. Lyle stared at the envelope. How much? She asked. Too much. She stepped beside him, took the notice, read it. Not if we start selling. Selling what? There's nothing left. There's always something. The neighbors owe favors. That old tractor can be parted. The orchard still bears. He shook his head. We can try. Together, she said. His throat tightened. I don't know how to let someone help. She placed a hand on his arm, then start learning. And just like that, the real fight began. The one for the land, the one for their second chance. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The next 10 days were a storm of sweat, deals, and grit. Lyle watched in quiet astonishment as Almina took charge of the place like she'd been born to it. He'd thought he was bringing home a work hand, maybe a housekeeper. What he got was a general. She marched into the orchard, sleeves rolled, and organized the neglected trees like soldiers. Rotten fruit was cleared, good apples boxed, and by dusk she'd walked 2 miles into town with 3 crates in a wheelbarrow and sold them straight to the hotel kitchen. Came back with $8 and 2 jars of jam. You carried that? Not much of a choice, was it? When Lyle tried to stop her, she leveled him with a look. I made a promise when I signed that contract, same as you. He couldn't argue. Didn't want to, but it changed something. Every time she returned with coin or supplies, every time a neighbor dropped off eggs or offered to trade nails for stew, every time she reminded him they had a future to fight for, something in him stood a little straighter. By the 7th day, he was up before her. Bacon already on the stove. I'm not helpless, you know, he said. She took her coffee, hid a smile. We'll see. When they had enough saved to cover half the lien, she drew up a list. Old Mr. Pritchard said he'll buy kindling. You cut, I deliver. The town mercantile needs shelves fixed. And the deputy's wife wants her sewing table repaired. You know, joinery? Some. Good. I told her you'd come Tuesday. You volunteering me now? Someone has to. You'd still be staring at the porch if I waited on you to move. He grumbled, but he went. Tuesday night, he came home to find her in the garden, sleeves streaked with dirt, hair sticking to her brow. Dinners. Cold, she said. He dropped beside her, too tired to move. That table had 6 different nails from 4 different decades. She handed him a tin cup of water. You fix it? Tighter than a preacher's purse. They drank in silence. Then she said, we made $46 in 7 days. You realize that? Feels like more. Feels like hope. The morning before the payment was due, a dust storm rolled in like judgment. The wind howled across the plains, tearing shingles and choking the sky. Almina ran for the chickens while Lyle wrestled with the barn doors. They spent the day battening down windows, tying rope around the cellar doors, and praying the storm didn't take what little they had left. By sunset, the worst had passed, but the orchard was ruined. Half the apples on the ground, bruised and beaten. The chicken coop had split a beam. The cart they'd planned to use to haul their last boxes into town, shattered axle. Lyle sat on the porch steps, fists clenched. It was enough. We had enough. She knelt beside him. Then we find another way. I can't ask more of you. You're not. I'm already in it. He looked at her. Saw the dirt on her face, the scratch on her cheek from a flying branch. And still. She stared back, unbowed. You married me for a roof and food. You didn't sign up for this. I signed up for survival. And we're surviving. Barely. Better than alone. That night, they sat in the barn on overturned buckets and split a cold biscuit. He caught her watching him. What? You're different than you were that first morning. More broke? She shook her head. Less alone. The next morning, he rose early. Hitched buckskin even though the horse still limped. Where you going? She asked. To collect. From who? Everyone who ever took my help, borrowed a hand, or owed a favor and never paid it back. He was gone before she could stop him. She spent the day pacing, tending the wounded chickens, repairing what she could, baking bread because it gave her something to do with her hands. He didn't come home until well after sundown, but when he did, he was grinning. $27, 3 sacks of flour, a wheel of cheese, and 3 extra men showing up tomorrow to help finish the coop. She stared. How? I reminded them what Bronner's did during the flood of '82, who rode out with medicine when their baby was sick, who built the church steps. I reminded them what we were, what we still are. She exhaled slowly, then smiled. You should have taken the cart. It's in pieces. You should have taken me. He looked at her. I was afraid you'd talk them out of it. She laughed. The first real laugh he'd heard from her. They paid the lien the next morning. With a handful of coins, a bag of produce, and a signature. The clerk looked at them sideways but said nothing. They walked home in silence, side by side down the dusty path, shoes coated in red clay. At the gate, she stopped. You know we're not done, right? There's fences to mend. That barn still needs a new wall, and winter's coming. I know, and you know folks are still going to talk. He shrugged. Let him. She reached for the gate. He caught her wrist. Almina, she turned. He stepped closer. I want more than a contract. She studied him, unreadable. I never wanted just a roof, she said. I wanted a place I didn't have to leave. He let go of her wrist. Then stay. Her answer was a kiss, not fiery, not rushed, but steady. Like everything else she did. And the gate creaked shut behind them as they walked up the path. Together. Autumn came with a slower sun, gold in its sadness, stretching across the hills like memory. Leaves turned dusty amber and blew down the fence line in long lazy spirals. The orchard, battered though it was, managed a modest second fruiting. And the hens, settled from the storm, began laying again. Life didn't just continue. It deepened. Every morning now, Lyle poured 2 cups of coffee without thinking. Almina no longer asked where tools were kept. She knew. They worked without ceremony, side by side like oxen with the same rhythm in their bones. The silence between them wasn't born of awkwardness, but of trust. There were things in the air they didn't say aloud, and didn't need to dot until the letter arrived. It came by way of Everett Lang, the station agent, who stopped by once a month to bring parcels too large for the town post. Almina was shelling beans on the porch when he walked up. "Morning, Ms. Bronner. Got something addressed to you, registered." She took the envelope, squinting at the seal. "Government. Military. To be exact." Lyle appeared at the door, wiping his hands on a rag. "You expecting something?" Almina shook her head. Lang tipped his hat. "Well, I'll be on." When he was gone, Lyle sat beside her, gaze on the thick envelope. "Open it?" She hesitated, then tore the seal. Her eyes skimmed, then stopped. Her hands lowered, face unreadable. "What is it?" "It's about Jacob, my first husband." He waited. She swallowed hard. "Turns out the well. He didn't fall. They exhumed him for a federal inquiry." Lyle sat straighter. "He was murdered." The words landed hard. "By who?" "They think it was tied to a shipment of stolen war bonds. He was mixed up in something. There's a trial, and they want me to testify." "You know anything about it?" "No, but they say I'm the last person who spoke with him." Lyle was quiet for a long time. "When?" "2 weeks. They'll send for me." He stood, turned toward the barn, then stopped. "You want me to come with you?" She met his eyes. "Yes." 2 days later, they boarded the coach for Silverbend. The town was larger than Whisper Valley, the streets cleaner. The courthouse loomed tall and square like a giant ready to pass judgment on everything below it. They stayed in a room above the bakery. Twin beds, thin walls. Almina barely spoke the first night. "You okay?" "No." He waited. "I kept thinking I was the worst thing that ever happened to him. Now I find out he was doing worse all along." Lyle didn't offer platitudes, just reached across the narrow space between the beds and took her hand. She didn't let go. At the trial, she wore a dark dress and a calm face. She answered every question clearly, told the truth. When the defense tried to paint her as complicit, she stared them down with the force of someone who had shoveled her own grief and planted something better in its place. When the trial ended, and the man responsible was convicted, she stepped out into the sun and took a breath so deep it seemed to fill her bones. "It's done," she said. And Lyle said, "Now we go home." On the coach ride back, she fell asleep against his shoulder. He didn't move for the whole 6-hour ride, though his arm went numb. When she woke, she looked up and whispered, "You stayed." "Course I did." She blinked slowly, still drowsy. "You're better than he ever was." Lyle didn't answer, but his arm tightened around her. The ranch greeted them like an old dog, eager and dusty. The chickens clucked their welcome. The orchard dropped another handful of fruit. The world hadn't changed, but she had. He could see it in the way she moved. Straighter, lighter. And when she set the table that night, she placed 2 candles in the middle without saying why. At dinner, she reached across, took his hand again. "Not just survival anymore. No, now I want more." He raised her hand to his lips. "Then more you shall have." And the candlelight danced in their eyes, in their future. The first frost came early. Lyle stepped onto the porch that morning, breath fogging, the boards creaking beneath his boots. Almina followed with 2 mugs, steam curling skyward from the tin rims. "It's coming," she said. He didn't ask what. They both knew. Winter. The hard kind. They had 2 cords of wood, 4 barrels of flour, enough preserves to last a couple months. But the well was low, and the chimney hadn't been swept since before her arrival. The barn roof still leaked, and Buckskin's limp had worsened. She handed him his mug. Their hands brushed, stayed. "We can make it," she said. "I know." But he didn't sound sure. That afternoon Lyle rode to town, brought back shingles, rope, and a length of stovepipe. They patched the chimney together in the wind, bundled in coats and scarves, shouting over the gusts. The cold got into his bones. She massaged his hands in the kitchen afterward, warming his fingers like she was kneading dough. "You're gonna lose one of those if you don't take better care," she scolded gently. "Might be worth it. Don't make me feed you with a spoon." He smirked. She blushed. On the 6th night of frost, a knock came at the door just after sundown. They both froze. No one came this late. Almina reached for the skillet. Lyle opened the door. A woman stood on the porch, swaying. Thin, young, face wine-burnt, carrying a child no older than 2. "Please," she said, barely a whisper. "We got turned out." Almina pushed past Lyle and caught the girl before she collapsed. They laid her on the couch. The baby cried once, then quieted with a dry cough that made Almina's jaw clench. "Fever. They're both sick." Lyle brought water. Almina boiled rags, crushed herbs, and whispered lullabies that didn't seem to come from any songbook. The girl's name was Nadine. Her husband had died working the mine out near Wexler County. The boarding house turned them out 2 days ago. No kin, no food. "Why come here?" "Heard there was a ranch that didn't turn folks away." Almina looked at Lyle. He didn't remember saying it aloud to anyone. But maybe word traveled farther than fences. The baby's fever broke that night. The girls didn't. They stayed 5 days. Lyle gave Nadine his bed, slept in the barn. Almina stayed up all night, wiping the girl's forehead, singing the same slow tune again and again until her voice cracked. On the 5th morning, Nadine opened her eyes. "You saved us." "No," Almina said. "You just needed a pause." They left 2 days later, wrapped in spare blankets and carrying food enough for 3 days. Lyle rode them halfway to the next town. When he came back, Almina was on the porch again, sipping coffee like she hadn't missed a step. "You'd do it again," he said. She didn't deny it. "That child looked like one we might have had." He blinked, then looked away. She let the silence bloom, then said, "We could talk about it." "Kids?" "Yes," he nodded slowly. "You think we could make that kind of life?" "We've already started." Winter came in earnest the next week. Snow piled to the windowsills. Lyle shoveled paths. She canned root vegetables until her fingers blistered. They huddled near the stove at night, shoulders touching, stories slipping from them in low voices. He told her about the fire that took his first barn. She told him about her brother, drowned in a river when they were children. They stitched pieces of themselves into each other's warmth. Until one night, after the wind howled so long it seemed like part of the house, she said, "You never asked what I really wanted when I agreed to come here." "What did you want to be wanted?" He looked at her then properly, took her face in his hands. "You are." She kissed him with that same quiet fire she used in everything, slow, sure, unshakable. And for the first time, the bed didn't feel too big. Snow thawed late that year, but when it did, the earth sighed beneath them like a held breath finally released, and she stood on the porch, belly just beginning to show, while he built a new fence line with stronger wood. In the distance, 2 neighbors were fixing their own barns, roofs newly patched, chickens fed, tools returned, because sometimes help didn't come in the shape of coins or cattle. Sometimes it came in the form of a fat widow and a struggling rancher, and a promise that whatever they had, they'd share. Spring didn't so much arrive in Whisper Valley as sneak in under the cover of a gray sky and soft melting snow. One morning, Lyle stepped onto the porch and felt it moisture in the air, the ghost of warmth in the breeze, and the way the soil beneath his boots no longer cracked but gave way. Almina followed a moment later, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders and resting her hands on her slight but undeniable belly. "You smell that?" she said, squinting toward the orchard. "Damp leaves and earthworms," she smiled. "Smells like a beginning." They had survived winter. Not just endured it, but molded something out of it, something strong and warm. And utterly unexpected. And now they had a child on the way. But spring wasn't all fresh clover and new buds. The frost had killed most of the root cellar stores early. The storm damage hadn't spared the southeast fence line. And the town's grain delivery had been delayed by river floods. As the mud softened the ground, it also softened the line between hope and hardship once more. The first real workday came on a Tuesday. Lael climbed to the barn roof with new planks and pitch, hammering through misty drizzle while Almina, stubborn despite his protests, spent hours preparing new garden beds. She was slower now, breathless, but determined. By midday, she was sitting on an overturned bucket, cheeks flushed, one hand resting low on her stomach. "You're overdoing it," he said, climbing down and handing her a tin of water. "I'm pregnant, not porcelain." He squatted next to her, elbows on his knees. "Doesn't mean I want to watch you pass out in the onions." She laughed, winced, then waved him off. "We've got one season before this baby comes. If we don't plant now, we'll starve by fall. Then I'll plant. You dig like a drunk mule." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that how we're talking now?" Truth doesn't care if it hurts. Still, she let him help her to her feet. They finished the plot together, Almina directing with a stick while Lyle dug trenches that were mostly straight. By April's end, the orchard was beginning to bloom again. Pale pink blossoms swayed in the cool wind, and the hens had doubled their laying. Word had spread that Lyle was hiring help for harvest season, and a few young men came sniffing around for day work. One of them, Edgar Pike, was cocky lean and quick to comment. "You the one married to the woman from the auction?" he asked, hands on hips, eyeing the porch where Almina sat sewing. Lyle stood slowly. "I am. She don't look like much of a ranch wife." Lael handed him a shovel. "Let's see how much of a ranch hand you are before you talk about anyone's worth." An hour later, Edgar was sweating through his shirt and grumbling. Almina had come out to watch, sipping lemonade from a chipped glass. When the boy finally collapsed beside the fence, Lyle handed him a tin cup. "Still think she don't look like much?" Edgar wiped his brow and glanced at Almina again, who was smirking now. "No, sir. She looks plenty mean," Almina snorted. "Good. Keep that thought." One evening, a letter came from Deputy Cal Moran. Inside, a note scribbled in haste. "Trouble near the West Ridge. Coyotes getting bold. Calves missing from Coleman's. Keep a gun close. Will ride by tomorrow. They had only one calf. Just born a week prior." Lyle went out that night to reinforce the pen, nails between his teeth and his rifle leaning on a haystack. Almina found him around midnight, sitting against a post, watching the stars. "You planning to shoot shadows?" He gave her a tired look. "Only if they grow teeth." She lowered herself beside him, shifting carefully. You never really told me what made you quit ranching for those years." He sighed. "Wasn't just one thing. When the fire took the barn and the herd scattered, I tried to start over, but the banks laughed at me. Friends turned the other way. Felt like I wasn't worth saving. But you were. I didn't believe that then." She rested her head on his shoulder. "You believe it now?" He didn't answer right away, then softly, "Because you did." The next day, the coyotes came at dawn. 4 of them. Lyle was already in the pasture. He fired once into the dirt, yelling, arms wide. 2 fled. The others circled. Then he heard it. Almina shouting from the house, banging a pan with a spoon like a war drum. The noise startled the remaining coyotes, and they scattered into the brush. Lyle stood still for a long while. Later he asked, "How'd you know what to do?" She shrugged. "My mother always said, make enough noise, and even the devil will blink." In early May, the doctor came out from town to check on Almina. His hands were too smooth for ranch work, but his eyes were kind. "She's healthy," he said, after examining her in the kitchen. "Strong heart." Good position, but she needs rest. And help. She has me, Lyle said. She needs more. A woman can carry the world, but that doesn't mean she should. When the doctor left, Lyle started building a crib. He worked late into the night, carving the rails from an old walnut tree that had fallen in last year's storm. He hadn't touched woodwork since his father passed. The smell of shaved timber took him back to those long, quiet afternoons in the barn, hands sticky with glue, his father humming some nameless tune. Almina found him sanding corners by lantern. "Light, you planning to rock the baby straight into adulthood?" He grinned, just wanted to hold. She touched the edge, eyes soft. "It will." They stood there a while. She whispered, "We've made something good here." He turned to her. "You made it possible." "No," she corrected, taking his hand. "We did, together." The day the rains finally broke, Lyle stood at the edge of the orchard, soaked through, eyes squinting toward the rising creek. But the bridge held. The coop didn't flood. The calf survived, and when he returned to the house, dripping, Almina met him at the door with a towel and a kiss on the cheek. "Storm's over," she said. Looked at her belly. "No, it's just beginning," she nodded. "Let it come." And inside, the crib waited, and the house felt full. And for once, nothing felt temporary. Not the love, not the home, not the future. The last week of May came in warm and restless. The land began to change in the way only those who lived with it could see. New blades of grass pushing up from the winter-killed turf. Rabbits darting across the road in pairs, bees swarming so low they seemed to hum against the barn wood. Every sign pointed to one thing. Life was moving. And it wasn't going to wait for anyone. Least of all them. Almina's belly had grown harder, rounder. She waddled now, though she refused to admit it. Lyle watched her carefully but said little. He knew better than to try and slow her down outright. He'd learned. Instead, he found quiet ways to ease her burden. Fetching water without being asked, pre-chopping kindling, moving her sewing table closer to the window for more light. She noticed. And in turn, she left notes on his work gloves. "Don't forget lunch. I made apple pie. I added extra cinnamon dots sometimes." It was enough. On the third day of that week, the wagon rolled in from town earlier than expected. They weren't due for another supply run until Thursday. But when Lyle stepped onto the porch, he saw Sheriff Albert sitting beside the driver. Behind him, 2 other men rode quietly, and none of them were smiling. He stepped down off the porch. Slowly, Almina came to the door, one hand on the frame. "Mornin', Lyle," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "Mind if we come in for a word?" Lyle didn't move. "What's this about?" The sheriff glanced at Almina, then back to Lyle. "Something from your past. A man by the name of Vance Creel." The name hit like a hammer to the gut. Lyle took a slow step forward. "What about him?" "He's dead. Shot in Kansas Territory 2 weeks back. Found papers on him. One of them had your name." So it had a bounty stamp on it. $500. Signed by a circuit judge. Claimed you jumped bail 10 years ago. Almina stepped forward. "Lyle." He didn't look at her. "That was a long time ago. A mistake. I never even stood trial. The charges were dropped." "You never reported back," the sheriff said. "Never signed the paperwork. Legally, it's open." "You came here to arrest me?" "No. But there will be questions. Men are already asking. Someone's poking around Whisper Valley, looking for you." Lyle finally turned to Almina. She wasn't angry. She looked like a woman sorting through years in her mind. "I should have told you," he said. "Tell me now." That night, under the soft crackle of the stove and the chirping frogs outside, Lyle sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Almina sat opposite him, a blanket around her shoulders, her belly rising like a hill between them. "It was 10 years back. I was working freight across New Mexico. Some boys I rode with decided to rob a rail shipment. I didn't know till after, but the marshal didn't care. I was there. That was enough. They arrested you. Held me in a jail cell for 3 days. I got bailed out by a lawyer who said the whole thing stank. But before the trial date came up, the lawyer was gone, killed, or ran. I didn't stick around to find out. I ran. And Creel? He was one of them. Told me he'd burn me down if I ever said a word. Looks like someone burned him down first. He looked up at her. You believe me? She was quiet a long time. Then, do you believe you deserve to be punished for it still? He shook his head. Not anymore. She leaned forward, resting her hand on his knee. Then I don't either. 2 days later, they woke to the sound of hoofbeats. A man stood in the yard, tall and lean, his hat low. A badge on his belt that read Federal Agent. Lyle stepped out slowly, hand near his holster. The man raised his hands. Easy, I'm not here to arrest you, yet. Just here for answers. Almina watched from the window, rifle already loaded behind the curtain. The agent's name was Rusk, said he was tracing the Creel murder, had 3 dead witnesses. Wanted to know why Creel carried a paper with Lyle's name on it. Lyle told him everything. Straight. No excuses. Rusk listened. Didn't interrupt. When it was done, he folded his notebook. If I verify the bail story and the judge's record, you'll be cleared. But it'll take time, maybe months. Lyle nodded. Until then, you stay close. And you don't run. I've got a wife. A baby coming. I'm not going anywhere. Rusk paused. Most men do run. Then I'm not most men. That night, Lyle found Almina standing in the nursery, hand on the crib he'd built. I thought I'd lose you, she said. You might have once. But not now. Still could. Paperwork or not. He stepped behind her, arms around her shoulders. We face it together. Same as everything else. June came heavy and hot. Work never stopped. They fixed the fence, sold off 6 crates of apples, and bartered a quilt for another barrel of flour. Neighbors came around more often. News spread fast, as it always did. Some came to offer help. Others came out of curiosity, but none dared question. Almina. She had that look again, the one that had stopped half a town from bidding against Lyle when he first saw her. That calm, storm-tested certainty. And one afternoon, as Lyle worked the far field, she brought him a water jug and a folded slip of paper. Letter from Rusk, she said. He opened it. Case cleared. Judge's signature found. All records closed. Read it 3 times. Almina waited. Then he crumpled the paper and dropped it into the fire pit. No more ghosts. She kissed him soft. No more running. The wind shifted. Somewhere nearby, a hawk cried, and life moved forward. The days that followed were some of the finest they'd known. With the case closed and Lyle's name cleared, a heaviness lifted from the ranch like a blanket soaked through and finally wrung dry. Almina moved with more ease, her laughter quicker. To surface. Lyle found himself humming as he worked, something he hadn't done since he was a boy. The orchard yielded so well that he sold fruit in town for the first time in 3 years. And more than once, as he loaded a crate or checked a fence, he'd stop to glance back at the house, just to see her standing there, one hand on her belly, the other shading her eyes, watching him with a look that seemed stitched from thread finer than anything this world could weave. They had carved something real out of the hard rock of old failures, but life, they knew, never stopped long enough to let you rest in it. Not for people like them. It started with a wagon. Not theirs. Not anyone from Whisper Valley. A long black thing with iron-wrapped wheels and polished lanterns, pulled by 2 midnight-colored horses that looked too fine for dirt roads. It rolled in just after dawn on the first Saturday of July. Lyle was cleaning tools on the porch. Almina was slicing apples inside. He looked up at the sound of hooves. Tensed when the wagon stopped at the gate. 2 men stepped out. One wore a silver vest and glasses. The other carried a briefcase and moved like someone who thought money could outrun mud. Mr. and Mrs. Bronner? The man with the briefcase asked. Lyle stayed standing. Almina came to the door, her apron dusted with flour. We are, Lyle said. And you are? The man adjusted his tie. Grant Holloway, Regional Development Director, Western Rail Consortium. Lyle narrowed his eyes. That's supposed to mean something to me. The man smiled. With thin lips, it will. We're here to make you an offer on your land. Silence fell like an axe. Almina stepped down from the porch, wiping her hands. You came all the way out here to buy a patch of orchard and a broke-down barn? Holloway chuckled. Ma'am, what you have here isn't just a few apple trees. It's location. The new expansion line from Carson is heading south. We've surveyed several routes. This parcel, he opened his briefcase and drew out a map, sits dead center of the most viable path. Lyle didn't look at the paper. You already surveyed our land? It's public record. We have every right. And what if I say no? The man in the vest stepped forward. We're authorized to offer you $8,000, cash, today. Lyle almost laughed. That barn's not even worth $2. Exactly. You're sitting on a dust patch with a leaking roof. And a future that ends at harvest. $8,000 buys you a fresh start. Any town, any place. Lyle looked at Almina. Her eyes were dark. Get off our land, she said. The men blinked. Holloway cleared his throat. Ma'am, this is a generous offer. You think I came all this way, survived everything I did, just to hand it over to men in vests? Mrs. Bronner, you didn't see this land in winter. You didn't hear it scream in the wind. We did, and we stayed. Lyle stepped beside her. You heard the lady. The man in the vest muttered something under his breath. Lyle's tone changed. You want to try that again? Holloway raised both hands. No need for trouble. We'll be in touch. Don't be. The men climbed back into the wagon, drove off, and Lyle watched the dust rise long after they were gone. That night, they didn't speak of it, but Lyle walked the perimeter 3 times before bed, rifle in hand. Almina stayed at the window. Neither said aloud what they were both thinking. This wasn't over. The following week brought signs. Surveyor stakes with red ribbons. Piles of gravel left at the edge of the field. 3 strangers seen on the west ridge, writing and marking lines. Lyle went into town. Spoke with the sheriff. Elbert, you know what this is. They're testing. U.S. trying to wear us down, the sheriff sighed. You've got no formal protections, Lyle. If they file eminent domain with the county, we've worked this land. Built it up from near ruin. I was cleared of everything. I'm not a fugitive anymore. I deserve to keep what I bled for. I know, but the world ain't about what we deserve. It's about what we can prove. And they've got lawyers in suits. That cost more than my horse. Lyle left with his fists clenched and his mind grinding. Back home, Almina had started keeping a log. Dates, times, visitors, everything. If they're going to play official, she said, we play smarter. By the end of the week, they had 8 affidavits from neighbors stating how long Lyle had lived there, what improvements they'd made, how the orchard had turned productive under Almina's management. She even called in her own witness, old Miss Delfini from the church, who told the town clerk, I watched that woman pull potatoes from dirt so dead it made snakes cry, and now they want to call it worthless? The clerk laughed, but the papers were filed. And then came the final letter, nailed to their front gate. A formal notice of intention to initiate proceedings under right-of-way acquisition, pursuant to Municipal Code 13.5 with regard to parcel WHV-104. They had 20 days. I want to fight. Almina said that night, we don't have the money for a lawyer. We don't need a lawyer. We need to remind people that a farm isn't just acreage. It's history. It's memory. Lyle looked at her. You sure you've got the strength for this? You're due any week now. I've carried worse than this baby. He nodded. Then kissed her hand. In the following days, they wrote letters, called in markers, organized meetings, told their story. A reporter came from Carson City, wrote an article titled "The Widow, the Rancher, and the Railroad." Within a week, it was printed across the state. Support flooded in: food, signatures, cash in small envelopes from strangers. The Western Rail Consortium postponed their filing. And on the 21st day, a wagon arrived again, this time carrying only one man. He wore no badge, no vest, just a plain suit and a tired expression. "I've been instructed to withdraw the offer, officially. Too much heat. You win." Lyle didn't smile, but Almina did. "Then get off our porch. And don't come back." The man did, and the valley was quiet once more. That night, Lyle built a fire in the hearth. Almina leaned into him on the couch. "You really think it's over?" "For now." She rested her head on his chest. Then whispered, "I think my water just broke." The moment the words left her lips, time changed. Lyle's hand stopped halfway to the fire poker. His eyes shot to hers, wide, startled, then fiercely focused. Almina stood slowly, one hand on her lower back, the other steadying herself on the edge of the couch. "The baby's coming," she said. "Calm, too calm." "How long?" he asked, crossing the room in 3 strides. "Don't know. But the pain's steady now." He opened the front door and called into the night. The valley echoed back with crickets and wind. They were alone. He turned back. "Doc Green is 2 hours away if you don't break the wagon axle in a panic." Her voice was calm, commanding. That was her way. "I'll go." "No." He stopped cold. "No, we don't have time. You'll help me." "Me?" "Yes, you. You're the one who talked about midwifery when we helped Nadine's baby." I was quoting a book. "Then go find it." He found the book, yellowed and dog-eared, in the kitchen drawer, beneath a broken lantern wick and a stick of chalk. She was already upstairs, stripping the bed and lighting lamps. He ran water from the pump and boiled it, laid towels out, fetched every pillow they had. She paced the room, breathing in hisses and gritted breaths. "Contractions every 4 minutes," she muttered. "You sure?" "Been counting since the railroad man left." Lyle froze. "You waited to tell me? You would have panicked." "I'm panicking now." "Exactly. No sense wasting 2 rounds of it." He couldn't argue with that. By midnight, she was in full labor. The room smelled of oil lamp and soap. Lyle knelt at the side of the bed, the book open beside him, a towel in one hand, her wrist in the other. "You're doing fine," he kept saying. "Stop talking." "Right, fine, yes. No, I mean it." "Stop, your voice is too high." He swallowed hard. "Okay," she breathed deep, moaned through clenched teeth, then glared. "Why do men even have vocal cords during childbirth?" He said nothing. He just held on. The storm outside built slowly. Lightning crawled along the ridge but stayed silent. The kind of storm that watches. Inside, time unraveled. Minutes became years. Hours felt like seconds stretched on pulleys. The book fell open to a page Lyle barely remembered flipping to. The urge to push will come strong, and sudden. It came, and the room changed. Almina, who had faced bankers, bounty threats, and rail barons without blinking, screamed. Not in fear, not in surrender. In fight. And Lyle fought with her, holding her shoulders, whispering strength, pressing cool cloth to her brow. He had faced down men with guns, fires that devoured barns, and nights that froze bone. Nothing had prepared him for this. At 3:17 in the morning, the child came, tiny, purple, covered in blood and silence. And then a cry, wailing, beautiful, alive. Lyle nearly collapsed. Almina laughed and sobbed in the same breath. "A girl," he whispered. She reached for the FOSB baby, arms trembling. Lael swaddled her with shaking hands and laid her gently in her mother's arms. Almina looked down at the child, then up at him. She's ours, he nodded. Ours. They named her Sarah Ruth Bronner. For 2 grandmothers and 1 prayer. By sunrise, Green had arrived, breathless and pale. He checked mother and child, declared them both healthy, and then sat at the kitchen table and drank half a cup of black coffee in one swallow. You did all right, he told Lyle. I've never been so scared in my life. Welcome to fatherhood. The town came in slow waves. First old Walt from the mercantile, bringing a blanket knitted by his daughter. Then Mrs. Kemp from the church with 2 jars of cherry preserves. By the end of the week, 12 people had stopped by, all pretending to bring gifts but staying long enough to hear the story of the birth. Almina told it with a smirk. Lyle fainted halfway through. I did not. You nearly did. I was strategically repositioning. Everyone laughed. And word spread. They settled into a new rhythm. Lyle rose earlier now, fed the chickens and rocked Sarah Ruth while Almina slept. He found he didn't mind the crying. Not once. It was proof. It was music. He even started humming again. Almina recovered quickly, stronger than ever. One night as they sat on the porch, baby asleep on her chest, she said, "This is what I imagined that day in the auction yard." He turned to her. What part? Not the baby, not the land. She looked at him. You, holding her like that. He blinked and swallowed hard. Summer deepened. The orchard blossomed again. Lyle hired a boy from town to help with pruning. The boy brought a dog. Sarah Ruth loved the dog. Neighbors started calling the place the Bronner Farm. The name stuck. And for the first time since he was a boy, Lyle considered adding more rows to the orchard. Maybe some peach trees. Almina laughed when he said it. Already thinking of legacy? I'm thinking of jam. Letters came from cousins in Missouri, kin of Almina's. They'd heard. One even asked if there was room for a widow aunt to come help with the baby. Think we could fit another soul? Almina asked. We fit more than that already. And so the family grew. Late August brought one last visitor. Sheriff Elbert. He came on foot, hat in hand, just came to see the baby. Almina welcomed him in. Lael handed over the sleeping girl. The sheriff cradled her gently. She's got your stubborn jaw. Poor thing, Lyle joked. No, lucky thing. The sheriff looked up. You built something here. Don't ever let anyone take it from you. I won't, I know. That night, after dinner, they sat on the porch. A lantern burned low. Crickets sang. Almina leaned against his shoulder. You know what's wild? She said. What? 10 months ago, I was on an auction block. 10 months ago, I bought a stranger with the last of my pride. Now look. They looked. Sarah Ruth lay in a basket beside them, soft breath rising and falling. I never knew peace could look like this. Almina whispered. He kissed her temple. Then let's guard it. And as stars wheeled overhead and the land lay still and the baby sighed in her sleep, Lyle Bronner closed his eyes and let the moment root deep. They were no longer surviving. They were living. The first frost came early that year. It wasn't the hard kind that split wood and sealed doors shut, but a silvery whisper across the grass that shimmered and vanished with the sun. Lyle noticed it before dawn when he stepped out with a lantern. He touched the fence post, felt the chill bite back, and knew what it meant. Winter was coming sooner than they'd planned. He looked back at the house, where the windows glowed faint with lamplight. Inside, Almina was likely humming to Sarah Ruth, winding her into the morning. The baby had taken to rising early, just like her father, and Lyle could hardly complain. It gave him one more reason to wake up before the sky did. The orchard was quiet. Dew turned to frost. He walked the rows with a new awareness. Every branch, every bud, every crack in the trunk carried consequence now. He wasn't just growing fruit. He was keeping something alive for the ones he loved. By breakfast, Almina had noticed too. That frost hit the squash hard, she said, sipping coffee while Sarah gurgled on her lap. We may lose the last of the beans by next week. We'll pull what we can today, Lyle replied, already planning his route in his head. And I'll board up the chicken coop tighter. Worried about foxes again? He nodded. Winters. Lean, they'll come looking. Almina fed the baby with a soft murmur and then said something he hadn't expected. I want to write to my father. Lyle paused, mid-bite. After all this time? She nodded. He should know he's a grandfather. You think he'll answer? No, but not everything is about getting something back. Sometimes you write to remind yourself you survived. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. She wrote the letter that afternoon, folded it 3 times. Set it beside the sugar jar and stared at it for 2 full hours before sealing it. Lyle took it into town the next day and mailed it without a word. Harvest went fast. Faster than any year prior. The orchard seemed to bend toward them, as if the trees had decided to give them a season of mercy. By mid-October, the cellar was packed. Apples dried, potatoes bagged, carrots sanded and stored. Almina had filled a full shelf with preserves: plum, apple, cinnamon, blackberry, and 1 experimental batch of spiced tomato jam. Sarah Ruth had begun to crawl, scooting across the wood floor like a determined turtle. Her laugh was rare but full-bodied. When it came, it shook the walls. One Sunday, while Lyle was patching the barn door, he heard it again, Sarah's wild, unfiltered laugh. He dropped the hammer and ran. Inside, Almina was covered in flour. So was the baby. The bread dough had tipped, and the whole room smelled like yeast and joy. He stopped in the doorway and just watched. You gonna help or just gape? Almina said, tossing him a rag. I think I'll frame this moment instead. Late October brought an unexpected visitor. A man in a black coat, riding a worn bay horse, stopped at the gate around dusk. He didn't dismount. Just watched the house. Until Lyle came out, rifle slung casually over his shoulder. Can I help you? The man tipped his hat. Looking for Almina Holloway. That's still her name? Lyle's grip tightened. She's Almina Bronner now. Who's asking? The man smiled, slow and sour. Her brother. They sat at the table 20 minutes later. Almina held Sarah Ruth like a shield. Her eyes didn't blink much. The man's name was Nathaniel Holloway, 10 years older. Just back from New York. Said he'd read about the railroad dispute in the Carson City Tribune and recognized the name. I figured it had to be you, he said. Only one Almina Holloway I ever knew who didn't back down from a fight. Almina said nothing. I came to say sorry for not writing, for not coming after you. Still she said nothing. Sarah stirred. Nathaniel took off his hat, set it on the table. You can kick me out if you want. I deserve it, but I'd like to meet my niece first. That got her. She stood slowly, walked to him, handed over the baby without a word. Nathaniel took her gently. Hello there, little spark, he whispered. Sarah cooed. Almina blinked hard, then sat down. He stayed 3 days, offered to help with repairs, asked questions about the orchard, said he might be looking to settle down away from the coast. Lyle wasn't sure, but Sarah Ruth liked him. That mattered. Almina didn't cry when he left. She stood at the porch, baby on her hip, and said, You know where to find us now. Nathaniel tipped his hat. I won't forget again. November brought storms. Thunder that rolled like cannon fire. Winds that pulled shingles and screamed through the apple trees like banshees. Lyle and Almina nailed boards and sealed windows. Held tight. And when it passed, the house still stood. So did they. They celebrated Sarah Ruth's first winter solstice with candles and a small cake. Almina knitted her a blue blanket with stars. Lyle carved a rattle from cherry wood. They hung pine above the door. Sang hymns to the wind. The baby didn't understand, but she giggled when the fire crackled. And that was enough. One night deep in winter, Almina whispered, I want another. Lyle turned. Another what, child? He blinked, then smiled. I was afraid to ask. She laughed. Don't be. Life's been too quiet lately. They didn't know what spring would bring. Maybe hardship. Maybe beauty, but they would meet it. Together, and this time, not with fear, with hope. The first true snowfall came 2 days after the new year. It was heavy, not violent. Just persistent, like the land itself had decided to rest under a blanket of white. For 3 days it fell. Trees sagged, fences vanished. The orchard slept. In silence, inside the Bronner house, the hearth glowed round. The clock. Sarah Ruth took her first steps that week, wobbling from the stove to Almina's outstretched hands. She grinned the whole time, one of those open-mouth, giddy baby grins that threatened to break the laws of the known world. Lyle, who had just returned from chopping wood, dropped the axe and clapped like a fool. She walked. You walked, he shouted, lifting her high. Almina laughed. Now she'd be into everything. Mark my words. She wasn't wrong. With the land buried under snow, Lyle focused on repairs and deep cleaning. He fixed a broken hinge on the pantry door, resealed the windows upstairs, and even revarnished the rocking chair Almina favored by the fire. You always get restless in winter, she said, knitting with Sarah on her lap. Idle hands. He replied, You're not idle. You're nesting. He looked up. Nesting? She smiled, but didn't elaborate. He watched her belly for a moment, then smiled back. You think so? I know so. Almina's second pregnancy moved differently. She carried lower, felt queasier, and couldn't tolerate the smell of bacon, not even from the yard. But her spirit was steady. In fact, steadier than last time. Maybe because she knew what to expect. Maybe because Lyle was calmer now, too. He doted. Not in the way that annoyed her, she wouldn't allow that, but in small, perfect ways. Warming her boots before morning chores, leaving fresh sliced oranges on her workbench, and memorizing every page of the birthing book without telling her. You. Going to be the doctor this time too? She teased one night. Only if you scream at me less, he replied. No promises. February brought Nathaniel back. He arrived with a trunk and a letter of recommendation from a surveyor's guild in Carson City. He planned to start a small shop measuring parcels and advising local farmers on their boundaries. I thought you were a city man, Lyle said. I was, Nathaniel replied. Then I remembered I had a sister who can outwork any man, a niece who laughs like thunder, and a brother-in-law who survives fires and childbirth with the same expression. Lyle raised a brow. You're moving here for my expressions? Nathaniel grinned. And the preserves. He rented the old shepherd shack east of the orchard. Almina insisted on furnishing it herself. Keep it warm, she told him. And I want visits every Sunday. No excuses. Yes, ma'am. March thawed the edges of the fields. Lyle planted the early potatoes. Almina started pruning by noon. And napping by 4. Sarah Ruth found a love for mud and refused shoes entirely. They had to drag her inside every dusk, giggling and filthy. By month's end, the ground was soft again. And life moved forward. Spring wasn't without its troubles. Late frost in April killed half the early blooms. The roof over the tool shed caved in under a windstorm. And one of their old ewes gave birth to a stillborn lamb. Almina buried it herself, quiet, hands in the cold soil. Lyle watched from the porch. Later, over stew, she said, Everything returns. To the earth. That's not a failure. That's a promise. He didn't have anything to add. He just held her hand. In May, Sarah turned 2. They had a picnic in the orchard. Just the 3 of them, a quilt, and a lemon cake with wild strawberries on top. Lyle carved a tiny wooden horse. Almina knitted a green sweater. Sarah Ruth grabbed both, then toddled to a nearby tree and sat in the shade like a queen in her court. She's not going to need us forever, Almina whispered. No, Lyle said. But she always come home. June came with heat. The barn cracked like it was sighing. The chickens refused to lay for a week. Then, on the hottest day yet, Almina's water broke. This time, it was quick. Too quick. Lyle barely had time to boil water before she was gripping his shirt, growling, "It's now, Lyle, now." He delivered the baby at 2:11 in the morning. Another girl, dark-haired, quiet, didn't cry much, just blinked. They named her Miriam Hope. Summer passed in a blur. 2 children, 2 mouths, twice the joy, twice the fear. Nathaniel helped more, often staying late. Sometimes, Almina would glance at him with that same storm-tested look she'd once given Lyle, but it softened when she saw him playing peekaboo or fixing the wagon axle. "I never thought I'd forgive him," she told Lyle one evening. "But watching him hold our girls, something shifts." "You don't have to forget the past," Lyle said. "You just have to decide it doesn't get to run your future." Fall came like a friend. The trees turned early. The harvest was plentiful, and for the first time, Lyle and Almina had enough to send preserves, dried fruit, and applewood carvings to town markets. Their names were mentioned with respect. People asked them for advice. One merchant even asked, "Would you consider writing a farming column?" Lyle declined. But Almina said, "Maybe." And maybe meant growth. One night, as snow whispered again on the porch, Lyle held Miriam and whispered, "You came to a hard world, but we made it soft in places." She cooed. And the fire cracked. And from upstairs, Sarah sang to herself in that sweet off-key voice that meant she was content. Almina came in with tea and said, "I'm thinking of starting a school here someday. Not just for ours, for anyone. You'd be good at it. And let's make the land ready. Build something bigger than a house. Build a place for hope." Lyle nodded. The orchard slept. And tomorrow waited. The school started as a single bench beneath the oak tree at the edge of the orchard. That first day, it was just Sarah Ruth, sitting cross-legged in a green sweater, and Almina holding a slate board in one hand and a book of letters in the other. The sky was cloudless. The orchard buzzed with bees. Miriam napped in a woven cradle beside them, and Lyle stood at the fence with his arms folded, watching like he was seeing the future arrive early. "A is for apple," Almina said. Sarah Ruth clapped. "And B is for banjo," Almina laughed. "Well, sure, that too." By the end of the week, 3 more children had joined. Then 2 more the week after. Some walked 3 miles just to sit under that tree. The bench turned into benches, the cradle into a second-hand bassinet. Someone left with a note, "Your school needs a proper crib." Almina taught with no salary, no chalkboard, and no structure. Just patience and the belief that children should never be ignored. And people began to notice. Lyle turned the old smokehouse into a supply shed. Then, when it wasn't enough, he cleared the empty stall in the barn and reinforced the beams. By the time October came, the Bronner Ranch had a full-fledged classroom with desks, handmade by Lyle and sanded smooth by Almina. In the evenings, Nathaniel drew up plans to apply for a county charter. "Once this is official, you'll get supplies, a stipend, maybe even another teacher." Almina tilted her head. "You volunteering?" He held up his hands. "I said maybe." Lyle chuckled from the porch. But with attention came tension. Not everyone liked that a school had appeared on ranch land without permits. A man from the Carson County office arrived one Thursday, clipboard in hand, boots too clean for the road. "This violates Code 47B, he said, frowning at the barn turned classroom. Almina stood at the door, arms crossed. "You mean the code that says education can't happen in structures not zoned for public gathering?" "Exactly." "And where, sir, do you suggest these children go?" He blinked. "That's not my jurisdiction." She stepped forward. "Well, then go stand in yours." He left, but returned the next week with a notice. They had 30 days to either apply for a variance or shut down. Almina didn't flinch. Instead, she sent a letter to every parent whose child attended. She told them the truth. The school was in danger. If they believed in it, now was the time to prove it. 20-4 families signed a petition. 8 came in person to testify. At the county hearing, Almina stood in her patched brown dress, Sarah, Ruth beside her in pigtails, and told the council, "We don't need marble walls or polished bells. We need places where children are seen. If you close us down, you close down something that never asked for more than the chance to matter." The room went still. One councilwoman, a silver-haired woman with a pen tucked behind her ear, said quietly, "My father learned to read in a barn like this." They approved the variance. Unanimously. From there, the school flourished. They added a second barn stall, then a garden for science lessons. One parent donated chalk. Another brought a box of old readers. Even the sheriff came once a month to teach frontier law. Sarah Ruth loved spelling. Miriam loved crayons. And Almina never seemed more alive. Lyle kept the orchard running. Nathaniel managed land surveys. But both took turns teaching when needed. "We've become a village," Almina said one night. "No," Lyle replied. "You built a village. We're just lucky to live in it." She didn't argue. She just leaned against him, listening to the wind pass through the apple trees. Then came the accident. Late November. A snow squall hit unexpectedly. A cart overturned on the road near the ridge. 2 children were trapped inside. Lyle heard the cry from the orchard. He ran faster than he had in years. When he got there, he found the boy unconscious and the girl bleeding from a broken arm. He didn't hesitate. Carried both in his arms and sprinted to the house. Almina triaged them on the kitchen floor until Doc Green arrived. Both children survived. The families wept in their arms. The next morning, someone nailed a wooden sign at the edge of the property. Bronner School and Sanctuary. It stuck. Even in winter. Especially in winter. Sarah Ruth turned 3 in January. Miriam started forming words. Mama, moo, and more. The barn got insulation. The orchard gained 6 more trees. And the townsfolk. They began calling the path to their door the Bronner Road. A surveyor wrote it down. Made it official. One morning, Almina stood at the porch, arms crossed, wind in her hair. Lyle stepped up beside her. "Something wrong?" he asked. "No," she said. "Something's coming. I can feel it." He looked out too. The hills were quiet, the clouds low. Good or bad? Big. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either, just stood there. Waiting. The first letter came in the middle of March. It was sealed in a heavy blue envelope, the kind used for serious matters, government, law, death. Lyle retrieved it from the postman and turned it in his hands all the way home. He didn't open it until Almina had put the girls down for their nap. He sat at the table. She stood beside the stove, drying her hands. He tore the seal. Then read, and read again. Almina watched the blood leave his face. "Lyle." He looked up, blinking slowly. The railroad's coming back. Not the same company. A new one. Eastern Pacific Holdings. Backed by Northern investors. And overseen by a man named Whitaker Leeds, someone known for his charm and his ruthlessness. They'd bought up 2/3 of the valley's western edge. The letter said they wanted to purchase the Bronner property to complete a critical right-of-way that would benefit the entire region. Offered a generous sum. Too generous. You don't offer that much unless you know it's worth twice as much. Almina muttered. Lyle nodded. They've done their homework. Then let's do ours. Nathaniel went straight to town. He returned with maps, property surveys, and records going back 20 years. They've already bought out 6 families, he said. 3 of them didn't even realize it until it was too late. Some sort of clause in the old deeds. Do we have that clause? Nathaniel shook his head. No, your name's solid. You own this place clear. But if they get the land around you, they'll build through the side anyway. They'll force it. or make life so hard you'll wish you'd taken the first offer. They had two options: sell or resist. Lyle knew what he wanted, but it wasn't his alone anymore. That night, they sat by the fire, the girls asleep upstairs, and looked at the number on the paper again. It was enough to start over. Anywhere. Almina didn't even blink. No. He nodded. No. The first representative arrived 2 weeks later, a man in a gray suit with perfect boots and hands too smooth to know a shovel. He smiled a lot, didn't listen much. "You must understand," he said, "this line is going to revolutionize transport in the region. More jobs, better prices. You'd be helping your neighbors." Almina folded her arms. "Our neighbors don't need help from people who've never watched a storm chew through their roof." Lyle added, "And if this land is so important, maybe you shouldn't have left it to die the first time." The man frowned. "You'd be standing in the way of progress. Then progress should take a different route." He left, jaw tight. They expected threats. Instead, the railroad brought pressure. A letter to the school board, questioning the safety of children learning in a barn so close to a proposed railway line. A sudden inspection of their orchard water rights. Legal notice filed to challenge the original land grant. It came daily. A new worry. A new battle. Lyle stayed up late every night reading laws. Nathaniel wrote counterclaims. Almina didn't stop teaching. "If they want to rattle us," she said, "let them see we don't shake." But the stress built. The girls noticed. Sarah Ruth began waking with nightmares. Miriam clung tighter than usual. Almina grew tired in the afternoons, more than just fatigue. A kind of weight that clung to her spine. One night, when Lyle returned from town with another warning in hand, she didn't greet him at the door. He found her in the back room. Crying. Quiet. Angry tears she wiped away the second he entered. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not." She looked at him. "I can't lose this." "You won't." "But I could. I've never built something so full before. Not just the girls. The school, this house, you." He took her hand. "We didn't build it to lose. We built it to last. And I'll fight until the last nail in the last board to keep it that way." She nodded. And they stood together in the dark. In April, they held a town meeting. It was Almina's idea. If the railroad wanted to scare them into isolation, they would answer with community. They invited every family who sent children to the school, every farmer in the valley, every ranch hand, teacher, merchant, and midwife. They set out benches beneath the orchard. Lyle spoke first. Calm, clear. Then Nathaniel. Then, at last, Almina. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She just said, "This isn't about one family. This is about the kind of place we want to be. Do we let men with clean boots and false smiles tell us what's good for us? Or do we stand on the land we bled for and say, no more?" They rose to their feet, one by one. And the orchard held them. The fight escalated. The railroad petitioned for eminent domain. The town council rejected it. They appealed to the county. The county deferred. Then they tried the governor. And while politics churned and threats whispered through mailboxes, the Bronners kept planting, teaching, building. Because the land still needed tending. Children still needed letters and numbers and songs. And love still needed proving. On the morning of the county's final ruling, Lyle rose before dawn. He dressed slow, tightened his vest, brushed Sarah Ruth's curls back gently. Almina came down holding Miriam. He looked at her. She nodded. "I'm with you." They rode into town side by side. Not as a couple. As a cause. The courthouse was full. Even the judge looked surprised. Farmers, students, teachers, even the sheriff, one by one. They stood and spoke. About land. About truth. About the BRONNERS. When it was Almina's turn, she didn't speak about law. She spoke about her girls. How do you measure the cost of teaching a child? Her name? No one answered, because there was no answer. The court ruled in their favor. the railroad, had no claim. The land stayed. And so did the people. That night, they didn't celebrate. They just sat on the porch, Almina in her old chair, Lyle beside her. Miriam asleep against her chest. Sarah Ruth chasing fireflies, and the land breathing quietly beneath their feet. They'd won, but more than that, they'd kept their soul. Summer came slower that year. The wind lingered longer in the trees, cool and thoughtful, as if unsure whether to move on. Flowers bloomed later, birds returned in staggered flocks. But when the warmth finally settled, it brought a strange kind of peace. The kind earned, not given. Lyle stood in the orchard one morning and ran his hands along the bark of the oldest tree. He had almost lost this place. The soil felt sacred now. It had soaked in worry and stubbornness and joy, and held it all. Sarah Ruth ran past him, barefoot and wild. "Catch me, Papa." He chased her, laughing, until she toppled into a pile of fresh hay, and he collapsed beside her. Miriam toddled toward them soon after, waving a stick like a wand. Her hair stuck up in wild tufts, and her shirt was smeared with plum. Lyle caught her in his arms and kissed her cheek. "Witch of the orchard," he said, and she giggled. Almina expanded the school again. With the help of half the valley, they raised a new building beside the orchard, a proper one, with stone walls and real windows. The children painted the doors sky blue. They called it the Orchard School. On the first day of term, 38 children showed up. Some with books, some with nothing but curiosity. All with hope. The town began to shift around them. The Bronner Road became a trade route for smaller farms, and before long, merchants from 2 counties over began coming through just to stop at the Orchard School's market days. Lale's apple cider became local legend. Nathaniel opened a small surveying and notary office on the east edge of the property. He hired 2 apprentices and started drawing maps with intricate borders, so beautiful people started framing them. Almina teased him relentlessly. "You making art now?" "It's functional art," he'd say, chin raised. "Pretentious maps then." He grinned. She hugged him anyway. In July, a letter arrived from her father. It had taken over a year. Said he was old, weary, and sorry. Not the kind of sorry that begged to be forgiven. Just the kind that finally told the truth. He hadn't known how to raise a daughter like her. He hadn't known how to be a father at all. He had read about the Bow Railroad case. And realized too late who she'd become. There was no return address. She cried when she read it. Then set it in the drawer with Sarah Ruth's first drawing and Miriam's birth ribbon. Some things didn't need framing. Late August brought illness. A fever swept through the county, one of those strange ones that burned low and stubborn. Sarah Ruth caught it first. Then 5 students. Then Lyle. The house turned into a ward. Almina slept in 2-hour shifts, brewed teas from the garden, and read out loud every day, no matter how weak their voices got. Nathaniel helped where he could. But when he came down with the fever too, it was Almina who stood between sickness and surrender. "I didn't fight for this land just to let it win without me," she whispered one night, holding Lyle's sweaty hand. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured. She kissed his brow. No. They recovered. All of them. Though slower than they wanted. And when they were strong enough, they held a harvest celebration bigger than any before. They called it the Orchard Jubilee. There were pies from 15 families, music from a string trio, who set up in the hayloft. Dancing beneath lanterns. Almina wore a white blouse and a green skirt, with apples embroidered near the hem. Sarah Ruth had a crown of daisies. Miriam tried to eat hers. Lyle pulled his wife into a dance, just as the sun dipped low. "You remember when you said no one would ever call you a bride again?" he asked. She raised a brow. "Was I wrong?" "No," he said. "You were just early." She kissed him, right there, in front of everyone. And no one looked away. That fall, they planted a row of new trees, one for each student who had started the school that year. Some planted their own. Some stood beside Lyle as he dug the holes. When they were finished, Almina handed each child a ribbon and asked them to write one hope on it. They tied them to the branches. Dozens of hopes, fluttering in the orchard wind. One read, "I hope I grow like this tree." The land never got easier. There were still repairs, still debts, still days when fences broke and pigs escaped and storms arrived. Before supper, but it got fuller. Thicker with meaning. In every night, as the family sat around the fire, with Sarah Ruth sounding out her letters and Miriam curled against her mother's leg, there was a steadiness to the silence. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of peace. One early frost morning, as Lyle stood over the field tracing his breath, Almina came up behind him. She held a mug of cider. He took it. "Look at us," he said. "Still here." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Where else would we be?" They stood that way for a long time, the sun breaking slow. The orchard whispering thanks. Winter announced itself with a vengeance. The first storm came down from the ridge fast and cold, tearing across the valley like it had something to prove. Snowdrifts rose up overnight. Fence lines vanished beneath the white. The orchard, bare and brittle, stood frozen in place, branches like fingers reaching for a sun that wouldn't come. But inside the Bronner house, it was warm, not just from the hearth, but from the life that pulsed through it. The girls were bigger now. Sarah Ruth could read full pages aloud and did so with pride, especially to her little sister, who listened wide-eyed and solemn. Miriam, on the other hand, had decided she was a horse. She neighed more than she spoke and could often be found galloping barefoot down the hallway with her coat tied around her neck like a saddle. Lyle loved every second of it. Almina did too, though she'd occasionally glance at the door, lips tight, as if waiting for something she couldn't name. It arrived in February. A stranger came up the Bronner Road. Not unusual people passed through often now. They came for cider, for maps, for questions about the school or the land. But this man didn't walk like someone seeking help. He walked like someone looking for closure. He wore a long brown coat, a bowler hat, and gloves too nice for someone traveling in snow. Almina met him at the porch. "Can I help you?" He took off his hat. Snow dusted his shoulders. "My name is Thomas Maynard. I believe you knew my brother, Jacob." The name hit like a hammer. Lyle stepped up behind her. "Go on," Almina said. "I'm not here for trouble. I've only just learned what happened. The trial, everything. I was estranged from him for years. But I needed to see where he lived, where he died." She nodded slowly. "You want to come in?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I've already taken too much of your time. Just thank you for giving him peace, if you did." "He gave none to me," she said, voice steady. "But I found it anyway." He nodded once, left footprints behind, and never came back. The encounter stirred something. Memories, questions. That night, Almina pulled the box from the top shelf, the one with old photos, old letters, old names. She sat beside Lyle on the floor. "I don't want to forget," she said. "But I don't want to carry it either." He touched her hand. "Then let's sort it together." They burned some pages, kept others, wrote new notes in the margins. Made peace with paper, and watched the fire take the rest. Spring crept in slow. The orchard buds arrived late but strong. New lambs wobbled on weak legs and grew fast. The school added 2 more teachers, one a widow from Newbury, another a farm boy with a limp and a gift for poetry. Almina let him teach literature. He made the children memorize 1 poem a month. Sarah Ruth chose a sonnet about bravery. Miriam still neighed through class. In May, Nathaniel proposed. Not to Almina, he had long since found his own life again, but to a woman named Eleanor who ran the local supply store. She was sharp, tall, and completely unimpressed with Nathaniel's maps, which, Of course, made him love her more. They were married under the orchard trees. Almina cried. So did Lyle. They didn't apologize for it. The summer that followed was golden. No fires. No drought. No drama. Just days full of soil and laughter, pies cooling on windowsills, and the sound of children learning beneath open barn doors. Almina published her first article in the county education paper. Lyle carved a series of wooden toys that a merchant in Carson started selling. They earned enough to build a small library next to the school. Almina stocked it herself. She read every book before she placed it on the shelves. For quality control, she claimed. Lyle kissed the top of her head. For love, he corrected. Then came the letter from the governor. An invitation. The Orchard School had been nominated for a statewide award recognizing rural innovation and community service. They didn't expect to win, but they were asked to attend. Lyle didn't own a suit. Almina stitched one from old wool and pried. At the ceremony, they sat in the back row, hands clasped. When the school's name was read aloud, Sarah Ruth shouted, "That's ours!" The whole room laughed. Almina walked on stage with her head high. "We didn't set out to be seen," she said. "We just refused to be erased." Applause shook the walls. They framed the certificate, hung it in the schoolhouse. Not as a trophy. As proof. By the time winter returned again, they were ready. Every log stacked, every barn sealed, every coat mended. And when the snow fell, it fell softly, like a blessing. One night, as the girls slept and the fire burned low, Lyle turned to Almina. "Do you ever think about what might have been? If you'd never walked into that auction?" She didn't hesitate. "Then I wouldn't have found the only place I ever belonged." He took her hand. "You were never bought, Almina. You were chosen." She smiled. "I know. That's why I stayed." Outside, the orchard waited for spring. Inside, love made the waiting easy. Coming right up. Here's part 16 of the story, continuing directly from where we left off. The first frost held longer than expected. It lingered on windowsills and fence posts, crusted the orchard grass, and clung to the schoolhouse roof like lace. The children blew into their mittens as they arrived, cheeks pink and noses red. Each morning a quiet promise that winter was near. But inside the Bronner house, the fire stayed lit and steady. Almina stood at the window one dawn, rubbing her lower back, her hand unconsciously pressing into the ache that had returned with the cold. Lael came behind her, wrapped a quilt over her shoulders, and kissed the top of her head. "You been hurting again?" "A little. Just tight. I think I overdid it splitting firewood yesterday." "That wasn't your job, woman." "I didn't see anyone else up to it." "That's because we were all still sleeping." She smiled faintly, but the smile faded quickly. "It's not just the back. I felt dizzy, tired, not sick, but slow." He frowned. "You want me to fetch Doc Green?" "Not yet." But Lyle did anyway. Doc Green arrived late that afternoon, boots thick with mud, stethoscope already pulled from his coat. He checked her pulse, listened to her breath, asked a few careful questions. Then stepped back. "Well," he said slowly, "I think you're not sick at all. Just early." She stared. Lyle blinked. "Early? Pregnant, Almina? You're going to have another baby." The silence was long. Then Almina sat down hard on the edge of the armchair and laughed. A short, stunned laugh that broke into tears. Lyle kneeled in front of her, holding her hands. "You okay?" She nodded, crying. "Yes, I think so, yes." The news traveled fast, though not because they told anyone. Children notice things. Sarah Ruth was the first to ask, "Is Mama going to get round again?" "Like when?" "We had Mimi," they smiled, and said yes. Sarah Ruth clapped. Coming right up. Here's part 16 of the story, continuing directly from where we left off. The first frost held longer than expected. It lingered on windowsills and fence posts, crusted the orchard grass, and clung to the schoolhouse roof like lace. The children blew into their mittens as they arrived, cheeks pink and noses red. Each morning a quiet promise that winter was near. But inside the Bronner house, the fire stayed lit and steady. Almina stood at the window one dawn, rubbing her lower back, her hand unconsciously pressing into the ache that had returned with the cold. Lael came behind her, wrapped a quilt over her shoulders, and kissed the top of her head. "You been hurting again?" "A little. Just tight. I think I overdid it splitting firewood yesterday." "That wasn't your job, woman." "I didn't see anyone else up to it. That's because we were all still sleeping." She smiled faintly, but the smile faded quickly. "It's not just the back. I felt dizzy, tired, not sick, but slow," he frowned. "You want me to fetch Doc Green?" "Not yet." But Lyle did anyway. Doc Green arrived late that afternoon, boots thick with mud, stethoscope already pulled from his coat. He checked her pulse, listened to her breath, asked a few careful questions, then stepped back. "Well," he said slowly, "I think you're not sick at all. Just early." She stared. Lyle blinked. "Early? Pregnant, Almina. You're going to have another baby." The silence was long. Then Almina sat down hard on the edge of the armchair and laughed. A short, stunned laugh that broke into tears. Lyle kneeled in front of her, holding her hands. "You okay?" She nodded, crying. "Yes, I think so, yes." The news traveled fast, though not because they told anyone. Children notice things. Sarah Ruth was the first to ask, "Is Mama going to get round again?" "Like when?" "We had Mimi," they smiled, and said yes. Sarah Ruth clapped. Miriam cheered just because her sister had. The Valley took the news like they took all things from the Bronner house, as if it belonged to them too. Eleanor from the general store sent a bolt of soft flannel. The bakery left small cakes at the doorstep for a week straight. Nathaniel promised to handle all school paperwork until the baby came. Almina didn't argue, not this time. The pregnancy moved slower than her others. She was older, more tired. Her back ached constantly, but her heart stayed light. Lyle built a crib. Gabriel's first summer unfolded slow and golden. The orchard seemed to hum with him, branches shading his carriage, bees dancing low, the grass soft beneath his sister's bare feet. Sarah Ruth read to him often, sometimes nonsense, sometimes the weather forecast, always with a solemnity far beyond her years. Miriam, meanwhile, treated him like a living doll. She introduced him to rocks, frogs, and pies, mostly by placing them on his belly and giggling. Almina, though still healing, had a glow to her, not just from motherhood again, but from watching a house full of motion that did not break without her. That was a new thing, to trust the world to spin when she sat still. And so, some days she stayed on the porch, rocking Gabriel, listening to the wind move through the orchard, letting herself simply belong. Lyle expanded the barn. He'd talked about it for years, but never found the time. Now, with the market days drawing sellers from as far as Carson and new animals on the way, he couldn't delay. Nathaniel helped with measurements. So did 5 eager teenagers, who saw it as both a job and an honor. They built it fast and true. It was done. Almina christened it by dragging Gabriel inside and declaring, "If he doesn't scream, it's a good barn." He giggled. So did everyone else. That fall, they held the second Orchard Jubilee. It was even larger than the first. Almina wore the same green skirt. Sarah Ruth played the fiddle for the first time in public. Miriam recited a poem badly, but loudly. Gabriel sat in a basket near the pies, chewing on a wooden spoon. No one wanted to leave that night. So they didn't. They lit more lanterns, brought out extra blankets, sang until stars faded, and when dawn came, the orchard shone gold around them, heavy with fruit and laughter. Winter hit early the next year, and harder. A storm in November dropped 3 feet of snow in a single night. The school roof groaned. The barn held, thanks to its new beams. Roads vanished. Still, the Bronner house stood steady. They cooked together, read together, held Gabriel, while he cried through his first teething. It was not easy, but it was theirs. That made it enough. Letters came. One from Almina's mother, older now, asking if she might visit someday. One from the State Board of Education, requesting Almina speak at a rural conference. One from a stranger in Kansas, who had heard about Orchard School and wanted to replicate it. They responded to all three. Yes. Come. Yes, she would speak. Yes. Here's how you begin. The world had grown. And the orchard had become more than a place. It was a model, a ministry, a map. In March, Eleanor gave birth. A daughter. They named her Rose. Almina delivered the baby herself, crying as much as the new mother. Nathaniel wept in the hallway and passed out cigars to strangers. Uncle Lyle carved Rose's name into the library shelves beneath the quote, "To be well read is to be well armed." Life didn't just continue. It expanded. That summer, they opened the first orchard fair. Different from the Jubilee. More public. Less dancing. More trade. Booths lined the road. Children sold soap and carved whistles. Women entered pies. Men showed off cattle, tools, and feats of strength. At the center, the school hosted a knowledge tent with student presentations, maps, essays, and art. Almina watched it all from under a parasol, Gabriel bouncing in her lap. "I remember when all I wanted was not to be invisible," she whispered. "You'll never be that again," Lyle said beside her. "I'm not afraid of it now." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because I made enough noise to echo after me." Miriam started reading. She hated it at first, then tolerated it. Then one day devoured a whole primer in one sitting. She came running. "I did it. I read a whole book." Almina swept her up. "It won't be your last." Nathaniel was offered a state position. He turned it down. Said the orchard had better views and better coffee. At year's end, they held a tree lighting. They'd never done one before. Lyle wired lanterns through the orchard. The children painted pine cones. Nathaniel wrote a speech and forgot half of it. Almina held Gabriel up to touch the star on the highest branch. When the lights came on, the orchard glowed like fireflies had come home, and everyone stood still for a long, long time, not because they were cold, because they were full. In bed that night, Almina whispered, "Do you think we've had our greatest chapter?" Lyle thought, "No, I think we've just gotten good at writing them." She smiled in the dark, and somewhere beneath the stars, the orchard dreamed of spring. Spring returned with a soft hand. Not a rush, not a roar, just the slow unraveling of cold into color. Crocuses came first, pushing up through soil still half frozen. Then tulips, shy and proud. Then the apple blossoms, always last, always worth the wait. The orchard shimmered pale pink for 3 weeks, 3 sacred weeks. Gabriel took his first real steps beneath those trees. Miriam held out both hands, coaxing him forward like a ringmaster. Sarah Ruth stood behind him, eyes wide with the realization that her baby brother wouldn't be a baby forever. Almina stood on the porch, watching them, hand pressed to her heart. "Look what we made," she whispered. Lyle came up behind her. "Look what made us." The school expanded again. They knocked out the west wall and added 2 more classrooms. The library doubled in size. A woman from the state university came to tour the grounds and left, offering scholarships to any student who graduated with top marks. Almina cried in her office after she left, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she wasn't. She was ready. So were they. Nathaniel and Eleanor took a honeymoon. 2 years late, they left baby Rose with the Bronners and traveled all the way to the coast. When they returned, tanned and tangled and smiling like fools, Almina said, "Worth it?" Nathaniel grinned. "I'd marry her again just to get a second one." Eleanor snorted. "You will." Next time I'll take you someplace with fewer goats. That summer, the third orchard jubilee was the biggest yet. The valley turned out in full. Sarah. Ruth played 3 songs solo. Miriam read a story she wrote herself. Gabriel danced mostly in circles, mostly offbeat. Almina stood beneath a string of lanterns and told the crowd, none of this happened by accident. It happened because we stopped waiting for permission to matter. Applause thundered through the orchard. Then came the storm. Late August. A freak summer hail. Wind like a train. Trees cracked in half. Animals panicked. They barely had time to lock down. The orchard took the brunt. Half the apple crop lost. To school. Windows shattered. One of the barns twisted off its moorings. Lyle stood in the aftermath, soaked and silent. Almina came beside him. We'll rebuild. He didn't look at her. Of course we will. But just once I wish we could catch a break. She nodded. Rested her head against his arm. I think we already did. We're still here. He closed his eyes. Then opened them and started making a list. Neighbors arrived without being asked. Nails. Lumber. Soup. Someone brought a wagon load of tarp. Another brought 2 goats, gifted as emotional support livestock. Almina didn't argue, neither did the goats. Within 3 weeks, they had a new roof. Within 5, the orchard was trimmed and recovering. Within 7, the school was repainted. By the students themselves. Hard work is a better teacher than I am. Almina muttered. Nathaniel nodded. But you gave it to them. Fall came with a breath of relief. The trees yielded less fruit, but sweeter. The children worked harder, laughed louder. One morning, Miriam asked, Mama, how do you know when something is over? Almina paused. What do you mean? Like, how do you know when a season ends or a story? Almina thought, maybe it's not about endings. Maybe it's about noticing what's changed and what stayed. Miriam nodded slowly, then ran off to jump in a pile of leaves. In November, Gabriel got sick, just a cold, but enough to scare them. Almina sat up 3 nights straight. Lyle paced the floors. Nathaniel brought tea. Sarah Ruth sang lullabies. And when the fever broke, it was like the entire house exhaled. I don't ever want to feel that again, Almina said. You will, Lyle replied. That's the cost of loving them this much. She kissed him, and they went back to sleep. That winter, they rested. On purpose. They canceled the fair, delayed the school term, said no to visitors, and did something radical. Nothing. They sat by fires. Told stories, let the orchard sleep, and for the first time in years, the Bronners let peace be the only goal. The Bronner house sat quiet that January. Snow came often, but never harsh. A soft hush blanketed the orchard, the schoolhouse, the road. The wind didn't bite, it whispered. Even the animals seemed calmer, curling together in stalls as if honoring the family's chosen season of stillness. Inside, the fire never died. Gabriel started forming words. Almina swore his first was book, though Miriam insisted it was goat. Either way, he said them with purpose, pointing often, demanding always. Sarah Ruth practiced writing her name in cursive over and over. Lyle carved tiny figurines of each child and lined them on the mantel. Almina read novels again, whole ones. Uninterrupted. It was peace, unremarkable to others but sacred to them. By February, the stillness began to itch. Almina noticed it first. She found herself rising earlier, tidying things already clean, rearranging the pantry, straightening books. Then pacing. Lyle caught her doing it and grinned. You trying to wear a path to spring? I need to do something. Resting is doing something. You've never believed that. I'm learning, she sighed. I just ... I miss motion. He kissed her cheek. Then let's build something. They settled on a greenhouse, small, just behind the orchard's north row. Something to grow winter herbs and starter beds for spring. The whole family pitched in. Even Miriam, who mostly supervised while pretending to be a construction foreman with a pine cone for a clipboard. By the end of March, it stood warm, clean, humming with new green. Almina planted basil, then wept for no reason at all. Lyle held her silent. Then whispered, "We made this too." Spring arrived with a letter. It bore the seal of the state board. Almina had been named Rural Educator of the Year. It came with a medal, a stipend, and an invitation to speak at the Capitol. She laughed out loud when she read it. Then stared at the words for a long time. Not because she doubted them, but because for the first time, she didn't feel like an imposter reading her own name. In April, Gabriel turned 2. They held a tiny party beneath the orchard's first blooms. Sarah, Ruth made him a felt crown. Miriam baked a lopsided cake. Almina told him the story of his birth. Lyle taught him to say 2 and hold up fingers, though he usually flashed 3. Later that night, Almina whispered, "Do you ever wonder if there's more coming?" Lyle blinked. "Children?" "No, life." He thought. Then said, "Only if we're brave enough to ask for it." May brought visitors. 2 women from Kansas, a couple from Utah, a delegation from a small town outside Cheyenne. All had heard of the Orchard School. All wanted to build their own. Almina gave tours, shared curriculum, offered stories, but made one thing clear: this isn't about copying what we did. It's about finding your own orchard. They understood. And left changed. At the summer fair, a new booth appeared. Orchard Builders Guild. It offered starter plans, essays from students, maps of possible models. The line to visit it ran all the way to the cider press. Sarah Ruth ran the register. Miriam gave out stickers. Lyle manned the pies. Almina stood back and watched, stunned. They had become a blueprint. One evening in June, Eleanor came running across the field. Breathless. Smiling. Double quotes. "I got into nursing school," she gasped. "I start in September." Nathaniel stood behind her, holding Rose on his shoulders. Beamed. "I'm going to be a school husband now." "Whatever that means." Almina grabbed Eleanor's hands. "It means the orchard just grew another branch." In July, Miriam asked if she could start her own class. "For animals," she clarified. "I want to teach them manners." She made a sign. Held lectures, graded the goats. They all failed, but she gave them hugs. Anyway, the Jubilee that year included students from 2 new counties, over 100. Children danced beneath the lanterns. Almina stood at the front and raised her hands. "Tonight," she said, "we're not celebrating one family. We're celebrating what happens when a whole community decides to say yes to life." Lyle whispered beside her, "You've become a preacher." She elbowed him. He kissed her. That night, long after the music died down, Almina walked through the orchard alone. Past ribbons, past old trees, past new ones. And when she reached the spot where she once stood, tattered dress, bruised spirit, uncertain future, she knelt. Dug her fingers into the soil. And whispered, "Thank you for not letting her go. For becoming home." August brought heat thick as syrup. The orchard glowed with overripe fruit, heavy and blushing, bees staggering between blossoms and bark. Children dragged their feet in the dust, sun hats slipping, cheeks flushed. But no one complained, because that year, the harvest felt sacred. Each apple picked was a story. Each bushel hauled was a memory. Almina walked slower these days, not from age, not from pain, but from reverence. Every step between rows carried the weight of who she'd once been, and the miracle of what now stood around her. Sarah Ruth followed in her footsteps, notebook in hand. "What are you writing?" Almina asked. "Observations." "Of what?" "You." "The orchard, everything." Almina smiled. "Careful, you'll end up a writer." "I already am." And she was. Lyle's cider press broke. Mid-season. During peak sales. He stared at the mangled belt, cursed softly, then straightened his back like a man going to war. 3 hours later, It was fixed and faster than before. Maybe I should brake. More things, he muttered. No, Almina said. You just needed to remember that you're still the man who started all this. He looked up. And for the first time in months, his eyes lit with fire. Nathaniel got elected. County Board of Education. He didn't campaign, didn't ask, didn't even know his name was on the ballot until someone told him. They saw what you did, Eleanor said, and they want you to do more. He stamped. Then wept. Eleanor started her training. Left every Monday, returned every Friday. Each time a little stronger. Almina offered to watch Rose full time, only if you promise not to make her a revolutionary. No promises, Almina grinned. Gabriel turned 3. He demanded a goat parade. He got 1.6 goats with streamers. Miriam led them. Sarah Ruth wrote a theme song. Lyle played a drum. Almina laughed until she cried. Best birthday ever, Gabriel declared. That fall, the school hosted its first student-led conference. 80 parents came. Children gave speeches, presented projects, toured guests. Almina stood in the back, unnoticed. Just watching. Just proud. And when one mother whispered, "It's like they run the place," Almina smiled. They do. In November, the orchard caught fire, just a small one. A lightning strike on the far edge. Lyle spotted it first. Nathaniel fetched water. Teenagers ran buckets. Even the goats panicked. It took an hour to douse. No trees lost. No lives hurt. But Almina sat down afterward, trembling. Not from fear, from knowing how much there was now to lose. And how far they'd come. Winter came slow. Snow fell polite. The orchard breathed out, and so did they. Sarah Ruth won a regional essay contest. Miriam became obsessed with constellations. Gabriel learned how to wink poorly, but enthusiastically. Almina slept deeply, dreamed richly, woke smiling. That Christmas, they wrote letters to their past selves. Lyle said, "You were right to stay." Almina's sighed, "You will not always be broken." Nathaniel's, "He forgave you. You can forgive you too." Miriam's, "Don't worry. Goats forgive everything." Sarah Ruth's, "Tell her you love her more." They burned the letters in the fireplace, letting the smoke carry old sorrows away. In January, a stranger came, middle-aged, thin, dusty coat, tired eyes. He asked for Almina, introduced himself as her cousin from her mother's side. She blinked. "I thought you all were gone." "Most are. I'm not." He didn't ask for money. Or shelter. He just stood with her in the orchard for an hour. Looking. Listening. Before he left, he handed her a folded paper. Inside, a sketch. Of her. As a child. "I kept it," he said. "Didn't know why. Now I do." She cried after he left. Lyle didn't ask why. Just held her. Spring came again. Soft, sincere, satisfying. The orchard bloomed, fuller than ever. Children grew taller. Teachers grew braver. Neighbors grew closer. And Almina? She let the world in a little more, and herself out. That jubilee. The 6th. They danced longer than ever before. Nathaniel sang. Eleanor brought her nursing classmates. Miriam built a telescope. Sarah Ruth read poetry. Gabriel gave a speech consisting mostly of the words apple, goat, and mine. Lyle and Almina stood at the orchard's edge, watching it all. Alive. Changed. Together. Forever. Summer's edge arrived with a breeze full of lavender and laughter. The orchard, now nearing its 10th harvest since the storm, ripened like a memory made manifest. Every tree bore not just fruit but legacy. Every child who ran beneath them carried a lesson written in sun and soil. Sarah Ruth had her first student, a 6-year-old named Winnie, who followed her like a shadow. "She's asking about everything," Sarah Ruth complained one morning. Almina chuckled. "That means you're doing it right. She wants to know why leaves change color, why goats eat tin, why I call you Mama but call Papa Lyle, What did you say? I said I've lived longer. I earned some answers. Almina hugged her. So tight the girl squeaked. Nathaniel painted the schoolhouse. By himself, refused help. Why? Eleanor asked. He dipped the brush slowly, methodically. Because when I was a boy, no one saved a place for me. I'm making sure it's bright when they arrive. Eleanor kissed his cheek. And joined him anyway. Lyle's cider won a blue ribbon at the county fair. First time in 11 years. He hung the ribbon in the barn, right beside a faded one from a decade ago. Almina pointed at both. Which one means more? Lyle didn't hesitate. This one, he said. Because it's not proof I could, it's proof I still can. Gabriel learned to climb. Everything. Trees. Fences. The kitchen table. Miriam declared herself as safety officer, issued fake citations. Posted hand-drawn signs that read, nitrogen monoxide climbing without permission of the goat union. Almina laughed so hard she dropped a basket of apples. Who are you, child? She gasped. I'm the future, Miriam said. Get used to it. That fall, something changed. Not something that could be seen, but something they all felt. A shift. In the wind, a ripeness in the days. A sense that the orchard had reached the part of its story where roots run deep and branches begin to stretch toward other skies. In October, a man from the capital arrived. He wanted to buy the orchard. Model. Not the land. The idea. Franchise it. Package it. Spread it like wildfire. Almina listened, nodded, let him talk, then said, no. He blinked. Why? Because this was never meant to be bottled. It was meant to be planted. He left, and she never regretted it. At the winter lighting, Miriam read a poem. It began, once there was a woman too large for the world. And ended, so she built one that fit. Almina cried. So did Lyle. Gabriel clapped at the wrong time. Sarah Ruth whispered, you were the story all along. Almina didn't answer. Didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. That Christmas, they published a book, A Decade of Orchard Learning, compiled essays. Art. Photos. Letters. Even a few recipes. They printed 200 copies, sold out in a week, printed 200 more. In January, snow came heavier than it had in years. They were snowed in for 9 days, and not once did anyone complain. They played games, told stories, taught Gabriel how to make pancakes. Lyle built a sled. Sarah Ruth wrote a play. They performed it by firelight, with everyone cast as orchard trees. Even the goats had roles. Even the goats bowed. When spring returned, slower than usual, Almina began walking the orchard alone again, each morning. Before sun. With a basket. Not for fruit, for thoughts. She picked up notes, loose ribbons, broken twigs, and whispered thanks with each step. She started writing again. Privately. Stories of girls who healed towns, of widows who found strength, of teachers who taught the world. Without leaving home. She wrote under a pseudonym. Never told anyone. Until one day, she opened the local paper and found a glowing review of her own book. Lyle found her laughing over tea. What's so funny? She handed him the article. They called me brave. You are. No, but the woman in that story is. Same difference. She looked away. And smiled. That summer, the orchard held its first wedding. Not Nathaniel's, not anyone in the family, but 2 former students. They asked to marry beneath the trees, where they'd first met. Almina officiated. Miriam handed out wildflowers. Gabriel scattered goat treats by mistake. Sarah Ruth played her violin. Lyle cried, not because it was sad, but because it meant something he hadn't known how to name. They had made a place so safe. People wanted to begin their forever there. That night, as the lanterns swayed and old students swapped stories and toddlers danced in bare feet, Almina took Lyle's hand and said, we built a world, didn't we? He kissed her knuckles. No. We remembered one. She leaned into him. And let the orchard hum around them. Autumn didn't come with wind that year. It came with golden leaves, golden apples, golden sunlight pouring across the orchard in thick, syrupy beams. The air smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon. Everything ripened. So did Almina, not an age. In knowing, she walked with a steadier step, smiled more quickly, needed less noise to feel full. She had grown into her life like a second skin. And it fit. Sarah Ruth got published. A poem. In a statewide magazine. When the letter came, she stared at it for 5 full minutes. Almina was the one who opened it, read the words aloud, and then looked up to find her daughter pale and wide-eyed. "I didn't think it was good enough," Sarah Ruth whispered. "It was," Almina said. "You are." They framed it, hung it in the schoolhouse door right beside the ribbon Gabriel had drawn with crayons for best sister. Miriam began volunteering at the infirmary. With Eleanor. She didn't want to be a nurse. She wanted to watch people heal. She carried blankets. Fed broth. Told stories to the quiet ones. And always said, "Thank you," before leaving each room. "Why?" Eleanor asked one day. "Because healing takes courage. I want them to know I see it." Eleanor kissed her forehead and called her the kindest force of nature she'd ever met. Gabriel buried his favorite toy, a small wooden pig Lyle had carved when he was 1. He dug a hole beneath the plum tree, set it inside, and covered it gently. "I'm saying goodbye," he told his mother, "because I'm not little anymore." Almina blinked back tears. "Can I be little again someday?" He asked. "Whenever you want," she whispered, then dug up the pig that night, polished it, and put it in a box for him to find years later. That winter, Almina grew tired. Not sick. Not sad. Just tired. In her bones. She slept longer, spoke less, watched more. And for the first time since she'd arrived in this valley, she let others lead. Let the school be run by teachers she had trained. Let Nathaniel chair meetings. Let Lyle bring her tea instead of her rising to make it. And no one resented it, because she had earned the right to rest. On her birthday, the town surprised her, held a gathering in the old barn. Lanterns, cake, music. And a quilt, each square stitched by someone she'd taught, helped, or loved. Over 200 patches. Miriam presented it. Sarah Ruth narrated the meaning of each square. Gabriel tried to wear it like a cape. Lyle held her hand the whole time. Almina said nothing until the very end. Then she rose, took the quilt. Held it up like a banner, and said, "If you ever doubt your worth, remember you are stitched into someone's story." In the spring, Almina wrote a will, not because she feared death, but because she loved order. She left the orchard to all 3 children. With instructions, it must never be sold. She left her library to the school, her journals to Miriam, her wedding dress to Sarah Ruth, her ribbon box to Gabriel, and a sealed letter to Lyle. She didn't show him, just tucked it in a drawer. He found it 2 days later, opened it, and found only one sentence. "You never needed to save me, you just had to stand still until I could save myself." He kissed the paper and put it back. The orchard bloomed late that year. Cold, lingered. Rain-soaked. Everything. Some feared the blossoms wouldn't come, but they did. Explosive. Joyful. Relentless. At the Jubilee, Gabriel recited a poem with only 3 lines. "Orchards grow dreams, roots hug forever. Mama says love makes dirt holy." The crowd roared. Almina had to leave early. Too many emotions, she claimed, but she stood in the shadow of the barn and wept. Long, quiet, grateful. That summer, Sarah Ruth applied for a scholarship. Not to leave, but to study and return. Almina hugged her tightly. "I'm not going far. You never could. You'll be okay?" "I've been okay since the day I met you." Miriam began tutoring, started her own club, published an essay in the newspaper titled, "What Grows in a Girl with Roots." Almina kept a clipping in her apron. read it every morning. As if reminding herself the story was real. Gabriel found the wooden pig again, asked who put it there. Almina said, maybe someone who didn't want you to forget. He hugged it, slept with it, then gave it to a toddler visiting the orchard for the first time. It's magic, he said. It keeps you safe. Almina didn't cry that time. She just sat quietly and breathed in the kind of peace that lives only in orchards. Autumn came early, just a whisper, a faint gold tucked into the corners of leaves, a cool breath at dawn. The orchard slowed, ripening not just with fruit but with meaning. A decade had passed. 10 whole years since the girl in the threadbare dress walked up the Bronner Road and changed everything. Almina woke with a start one morning and knew it was time not to leave, but to mark to name to remember. She started gathering scraps, notes, photos, letters, old lesson plans, journal entries, ribbons, student essays, doodles left on desks, soil from the tree line, a broken teacup from the first orchard meeting, a stone from the creek where Lyle first kissed her hand, and she built an archive. One room in the house became something else entirely, a living history. Miriam called it the memory room. Gabriel called it the heart closet. Lael called it sacred. Sarah Ruth simply sat in it and wept. The orchard began bearing 2 kinds of fruit. Not just apples. But invitations. From schools. From historians. From filmmakers. One even came from the governor's office. Almina read each one slowly, then filed them under a folder labeled. Maybe she wasn't ready to travel, but she was ready to be known. In October, Miriam proposed building a museum. Not a big one, just a small place. 1 room, then 2. School voted. The town contributed. And by Christmas, it had a name. The Orchard of Becoming. Gabriel made the sign himself, out of cedar. With a carved apple and a goat beneath it. Lyle started writing little essays. Reflections. He called them orchard meditations, posted them weekly at the market. They were raw, honest, sometimes funny. People began clipping them, saving them, sending them across the country. He signed them simply, a farmer who stayed. Sarah Ruth returned from her scholarship trip with new ideas. Better curriculum, broader readings, but also more clarity. I want to teach here, forever, Almina said. Then, start now. They created a co-director title, equal weight, equal voice, and Almina didn't feel replaced. She felt rooted. Nathaniel retired. Quietly. One afternoon, he left the schoolhouse keys on Almina's desk and walked to the edge of the orchard. There, Eleanor waited with Rose. They didn't speak. Just held hands and watched the trees sway. Almina found the keys, hours later, tied with a ribbon. And a note, for the girl who taught me to forgive the boy I was. That winter, Almina got sick, just a cold, but it lingered. Lyle fretted. Miriam brewed teas from her own recipe. Gabriel sat beside her bed and told long, rambling stories about goat adventures and imaginary kingdoms. Sarah Ruth ran the house. And Almina, for the first time in a long while, allowed herself to be held. Fully. Without needing to hold back. She healed, but slower. And gentler. On her recovery walk, she visited each tree, tied ribbons. Spoke prayers, touched bark, like it might vanish. When she reached the edge, the place she first arrived, all those years ago, she knelt. Closed her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." A breeze answered. Carrying the scent of apple and ash. That spring, the museum opened. Hundreds came. Former students, new families. Journalists. Farmers. And in the final room, under soft light, a single plaque read, "She arrived with nothing. She left us everything." Almina stood before it in silence. Then added one more line beneath it, "And she never really left." That summer, Gabriel found an injured fox near the fence line, named it Franklin. refused to leave its side. When it healed, it stayed, became a legend. In the valley, the orchard fox, even the goats gave it space. Miriam got accepted to a science camp. 2 weeks in the mountains. She panicked. Didn't want to leave the orchard. Almina sat with her. In the loft, you're allowed to grow. But what if I change? You will. That's the point. Miriam nodded slowly and packed her telescope first. Sarah Ruth got engaged. Young teacher from a nearby valley. Kind, quiet, strong. He proposed beneath the orchard tree she'd planted. As a child, she said yes, then ran to tell her mother. Almina held her face in both hands. This valley's never known a better bride. That fall, the orchard bore more apples than ever. So many, they had to give them away, and no one went hungry. Not that year. Not in their town. The first frost came like a whisper. White edged the grass. Apple skins chilled before sunrise. The barn groaned in its beams like an old man stretching his bones. And Almina, wrapped in her shawl, stood beneath the oldest tree in the orchard and whispered to the wind. I remember. The tree said nothing. Didn't need to. Sarah Ruth's wedding arrived in October. She didn't want grandeur. She wanted roots. So they married in the orchard. Under her childhood tree, the one with the swing. Gabriel once fell off and broke his tooth. She wore a dress embroidered with vines, carried a bouquet made from wild herbs and dried daisies. Almina officiated. Lyle gave her away. Gabriel wept. Miriam played violin. Even the goats behaved. Just before the vows, Sarah Ruth looked at her mother and said, You taught me how to grow. That's why I can give this love room to do the same. Almina didn't cry. She smiled. And when she spoke the words, You may now kiss, her voice didn't even shake. But later, in the quiet of the barn, she wept so gently the straw barely stirred. Miriam started writing songs. Not childish rhymes, full compositions, inspired by wind and bark, and the hush of snowfall. She sang them barefoot, said shoes got in the way of her rhythm. Eleanor called her the barefoot bard. Gabriel called her sister with secrets. Almina just called her radiant. That winter, a reporter came from a national paper, wanted to do a feature. Almina agreed. Reluctantly. She answered every question, showed every corner, introduced every student. At the end, he asked, What's the most important thing you've learned? She stared at the orchard. Then said, That being loved well doesn't erase the past. It makes it bearable. He nodded. But she could tell he didn't quite understand. That was okay. Some truths were for those who'd walked the hard road. In February, Lyle got sick, for real. A flu that turned into pneumonia. It scared them. Not because it was deadly, but because it reminded them nothing is forever. Almina didn't leave his side. Sarah Ruth canceled her honeymoon. Miriam read aloud from Lyle's own journals. Gabriel brought in snow to cheer him up, which melted all over the blankets, but Lyle pulled through. And when he finally stood again, he kissed Almina's hand and said, Guess I'm not done learning how to love you. She pressed her forehead to his chest. Good. That spring, the orchard bloomed early. As if in celebration. Pink and white and defiant. Birdsong returned louder. The goats birthed 3 sets of twins. Gabriel insisted on naming them after Greek gods. Almina allowed it. Hera turned out to be the sassiest. The school took in 5 new teachers. Almina didn't train them. Sarah Ruth did. And when she did, she used her mother's old notebooks, even quoted her. Now and then. Miriam teased her, quoting the living. How radical. Sarah Ruth didn't mind. She was proud. Eleanor opened a second clinic, this one in the next county over. Asked Miriam to help design it. They did it together. Over a summer of chalkboards, blueprints, and wild laughter. By fall, it was open, and already busy. Eleanor said, You don't need a degree to change lives. Just vision and grit. Miriam wrote it on her wall. With paint. In giant letters. Almina began dreaming more. Of her mother, of the railroad, house, of the auction, of Lyle's old hands on her back as she labored with Sarah Ruth. Of goats screaming, of apples falling, of silence. She wrote them down. Called them night letters. Miriam found one and cried, "Don't leave yet." "I'm not," Almina promised. "But I'm learning how." That fall, they buried a friend. Mr. Heath, the old blacksmith. The town mourned. Gabriel made a small iron tree from scraps, placed it on his grave. "He forged strong things," Gabriel said, "like doors and people." Almina hugged him for a long time. "You're learning the hardest part," she said. "What's that?" "How to stay soft when the world turns sharp." The orchard began giving less fruit, not because it was dying, because it was aging. Trees leaned, branches thinned. Almina took note. New. What came next? They started planting again. New rows, new soil, a new grove. Sarah Ruth led the children in a planting ceremony. Miriam played music. Gabriel whispered to each sapling. Almina stayed back, let them carry it forward. That winter, she wrote her last journal. On the first page, "If you are reading this, you've found your way home." And beneath that, "Now make it yours." In the last dusklight hush before sundown, as cicadas buzzed low and heat shimmered off the crusted earth, Lyle Bronner watched the auction yard from the high corner of the fence, his calloused hands folded over the cedar rail like roots. Wind carried the mingled scent of sweat, sun-bleached timber, and horse dung, along with the occasional hopeful cry of an auctioneer fighting the slow death of his own reputation. A rancher without cattle. That was the phrase folks used behind his back. And not kindly. Not even a decade ago, the Bronner spread had stretched 1,200 acres and moved 2,000 head a year. Now there wasn't enough in his name to buy a fresh horseshoe, let alone a steer. But still he showed up every month, hat in hand, boots worn thin, pretending he had business among the men whose wealth had grown while his crumbled like dry soil. They noticed him the way buzzards notice limping calves. And today, they'd smell the wound deeper than usual. His last horse, Buckskin, had gone lame, and even the barn roof had caved in after last week's storm. There was nothing left. Nothing but the fool's hope that something at this auction would give him a reason to come home without folding in on himself entirely. But it wasn't a heifer or a wagon team that stopped his breath when he saw her. She stood under the oak, wide-hipped and thick around the waist, her gingham dress clinging too close for modesty in the heat. She wore shame like a mantle and still held her head high. A woman in her 30s, maybe late, with eyes like rain-soaked earth and hands that looked like they'd fought off worse than hunger. A widow. That much was clear. No wedding ring, no escort, no laughter, just a sign pinned to her shoulder. Work marriage only, all rights reserved. Lyle had heard of it. Women too poor to keep their family farms. They offered themselves up for work contracts in exchange for lodging and food, sometimes a wage, sometimes just the promise they wouldn't starve. But this was something deeper. This wasn't a woman looking for charity. This was a woman offering the one thing she still controlled, herself. "Name's Almina," the auctioneer barked, barely masking his disdain. 36, big bones, good for field labor or kitchen. No children, widowed last fall. Men chuckled. Someone muttered, "That one eats more than she earns." Another, "Might do better at the bakery than the barn." Lyle stepped forward before he thought too hard. $10 for the contract, he said. Loud enough, firm. The laughter faded. The auctioneer blinked. 10? Lyle didn't blink. Didn't smile. Another man raised a hand. 12, just for the stew. Recipe. Lyle turned toward him, slow and steady. The man dropped his hand. The crowd fell silent. Lyle took off his hat, stepped through the dust, and looked Almina in the eye. "I got no cattle, not much land. No gold buried under the porch." She looked up. Meeting him, level, he continued. "But I'll feed you. I won't raise a hand to you. and you won't sleep cold. If you want out after a season, you go. That's the whole contract. She looked him over, saw the truth in his wrinkled shirt, the honesty in his weather-cracked hands. Then she nodded. And the auctioneer said, "Sold." By sundown, she was riding beside him in his rusted cart, drawn by a borrowed mule. Her bag was small, her eyes quiet. The ranch came into view over the rise. More fence posts leaned and stood straight. The barn listed to one side, and the house bare bones, one porch rail missing, door hanging off one hinge. He saw her eyes take it all in. "Ain't much. It's more than I had this morning." They didn't speak the rest of the ride. When they got to the porch, he helped her down, tipping his hat in a way that felt like apology. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Clean the house before morning." "You take the bed." She frowned. "It's your house. It's ours now. Or it will be." She stared at him for a long time, then nodded. And that night, as he laid on the barn floor, aching from the day and unsure what he'd just done, he heard something from the open window of the house, humming. Soft, steady, like a lullaby he hadn't known he'd forgotten. And for the first time in a long while, he slept without nightmares. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you.